A global news broadcast warns that a sudden new ice age has completely frozen the world. A shivering reporter on screen tries to calm the public down and asks them not to panic. He reassures the audience that government forces will help everyone survive the crisis together. Suddenly, the emergency broadcast glitches out as the icy blizzard cuts the transmission short. The TV screen cuts to static, leaving the freezing room in total silence. Moments after the signal dies, a loud knocking echoes from the front entrance. Inside the dark apartment, heavy curtains and cardboard boxes are stacked to trap warmth. The heavy pounding on the door grows louder, shaking the barricaded hallway. Armed with a spiked metal bat, Hank cautiously walks over to check who is outside. Outside in the freezing cold, a young woman wrapped in a pink jacket gasps for air. Hank opens the door and is surprised to see his friend Hannah standing there. Hank tells Hannah to step inside quickly because staying out in the cold hallway is dangerous. Hannah reaches out her hand and holds onto the doorway to stay close to Hank. Suddenly, Hannah pulls Hank close and kisses him right on the lips, surprising him. The pair share a passionate embrace right at the entrance of the frozen hallway. Warm breath turns into visible steam as they separate slightly from their deep kiss. Breathing heavily in the freezing air, Hannah looks up at Hank with deep affection. Blushing furiously, a confused Hank asks Hannah why she kissed him out of nowhere. Hannah softly admits that the deadly crisis made her realize her true feelings for Hank. She explains that hard times reveal who truly cares and who is meant to be together. Looking at him earnestly, Hannah begs Hank to believe that her romantic confession is genuine. Leaning closer, Hannah tells Hank to feel her racing heart if he doubts her devotion. She presses Hank's hand against her chest, promising to do whatever he wants to stay together. Hank asks Hannah if she's really willing to do absolutely anything for him. Hannah presses herself close against his leg, making Hank blush and panic in response. She whispers to Hank, telling him to close his eyes and remain quiet. Hannah gently holds his face and looks into his eyes to reassure him. Hank trustingly closes his eyes, waiting to see what she will do next. Suddenly, a shadowy figure sneaks behind Hank with a heavy weapon raised up high. A ruthless man named Kyle stands over Hank, telling Hannah that eliminating Hank saves food. Hank lies motionless on the icy floor, bleeding heavily from the brutal attack. Bleeding out on the cold floor, Hank barely manages to cling to life. Hank lies helpless on the floor as his life drains away into a pool of blood. Barely able to move, Hank feels his strength fading and realizes he is dying. Dark blood fills the floor as Hank slowly loses his remaining consciousness. Nearby, Hannah playfully flirts with Kyle while holding him close after their cruel betrayal. Kyle laughs and promises to give Hannah a reward later for deceiving Hank so easily. Blaming the cold-hearted woman, Hank vows never to be a foolish lover in another life. Suddenly, strange glowing lights appear in the dark void surrounding Hank's fading mind. A bright light flashes before him, confusing Hank in the pitch-black space. Hank stretches his glowing spirit hand toward the mysterious warm lights floating in front of him. He feels a comforting warmth spreading around him as he reaches into the glowing light. Hank wonders if he is entering heaven, but the glowing light suddenly shifts color to red. An intense surge of strange energy engulfs his soul, causing his glowing body to burn violently. Hank screams in agony as intense red energy surges violently through his floating soul. The blinding flash of light crackles wildly before slowly fading into the darkness. A final, powerful burst of energy erupts, shattering the strange dimension completely. Darkness consumes everything as Hank loses consciousness and sinks into a deep slumber. Hank suddenly bolts awake, gasping desperately for breath as his eyes open wide. Completely disoriented, he looks around a sunlit room, unable to make sense of his surroundings. He mutters to himself in utter confusion, wondering where on earth he could be. Bright sunlight fills the cozy bedroom, while green leaves gently blow across the wooden floor. 30 minutes later, a peaceful city skyline glows under a clear and sunny blue sky. Hank reaches toward the light, deeply moved to feel the sun's warmth on his hand. Standing on the apartment balcony, he shields his eyes from the glare of the bright sun. He stares out in complete awe, realizing he has miraculously traveled back in time. Hank notices a strange red glow shining around his right hand ever since he woke up. He examines his glowing hand with confusion, trying to understand what is happening. Suddenly, Hank lets out a hard sneeze, startling himself in the process. To his complete shock, the red light instantly transforms into a bright green glow. Hank stares in disbelief as the green light surges right in front of his eyes. He panics as the green aura flares up even larger than before. Hank struggles to comprehend the strange energy beam shooting out of his hand. He watches nervously as the intense green flame slowly begins to shrink. His weak legs give out, forcing him to slump down onto the couch. Hank rests on the couch, feeling completely exhausted and drained of all energy. Hank sits on the couch, wondering if his intense exhaustion exhaustion was caused by the green light. Frustrated, Hank swings his glowing green hand through the air, trying to understand his strange power. His eyes open wide as he suddenly comes up with an idea to test his ability. Hank uses his green flame to manifest a huge, sharp kitchen knife right into his hand. He holds the massive blade in awe, realizing he has gained an incredible cheat-like power. Hank lowers the heavy blade while thinking about what he actually needs right now. He scratches his head awkwardly, realizing a weapon will not satisfy his growing hunger. Suddenly, Hank's stomach rumbles loudly, reminding him that he desperately needs to eat. Hank opens his refrigerator, only to find it completely empty with almost no food inside. Hank sighs in exhaustion, realizing how dangerously low his current food supply really is. He gathers a few leftover roasted soybean snacks sitting around the room to stave off hunger. Hank looks down at his tiny meal, knowing he will need to go outside for food soon. Hank applies his green glowing energy directly onto one of the soybeans. He tosses the green glowing soybean straight into his open mouth. Suddenly, a loud explosion of smoke bursts right inside his mouth. A thick cloud of smoke blows out, completely overwhelming him. Hank is shocked as a full soybean stalk sprouts out of his mouth. He reaches up in amazement to touch the fresh soybean pods. Hank carefully pulls the plant's roots out from his tongue and mouth. Sitting on his couch, Hank stares in disbelief at the giant plant. He clutches his chest, realizing his green power can instantly grow food. Hank reaches back over to the table to grab another soybean. He plucks a fresh soybean pod directly off the growing plant stem. Hank cracks open a fresh pod and marvels at the perfect beans inside. Looking at his empty fridge, Hank realizes his new power will solve his food problem. He decides he must quickly stock up on essential supplies before the world ends. Meanwhile, birds sing peacefully in the bright morning sunlight outside. Hank steps outside into a bustling city street packed with busy shoppers. As he walks through the crowd, Hank feels exhausted from using his plant power. He clutches his throat, wondering why his strange new ability drains his energy so fast. Suddenly, a familiar voice calls out Hank's name from behind him. A stylish blonde girl named Mia approaches him with a bright and friendly smile. Mia blushes softly as she asks if he is out shopping today. Hank is completely stunned to run into Mia in the middle of the crowd. Hank remembers his past life when Mia was still a regular part of his world. He stands frozen in the crowded street as she walks towards him. Dark memories fill his mind as he thinks back to his previous timeline. He remembers that Mia's reckless behavior actually got him killed in the past. Hank squeezes his shirt tightly and forces himself to stay completely calm. Mia startles him by shouting his name loudly in the middle of the crowd. She pouts playfully and asks why he ignored her calls for so long. Hank puts on a polite smile and smoothly compliments her appearance. Mia giggles happily and blushes, surprised by how charming he sounds. Twirling her hair, Mia eagerly asks if they can go shopping together. She holds onto her expensive designer purse and waits for his answer. Hank walks ahead on his own, leaving Mia confused behind him. Hank promises himself he won't be fooled by Mia again as she hurries to keep up. Mia follows right behind Hank as they walk through the busy street. They arrive at a giant shopping center in the middle of town. This supermarket is known as the biggest and most well-stocked store in the entire region. Hank remembers how bustling this place was right before the catastrophic freeze arrived. In his past life, the entire supermarket was wiped completely clean right when the apocalypse hit. Back then, nobody ever figured out who took all the store's supplies overnight. Hank pushes a shopping cart through the aisle while checking survival notes on his phone. His phone displays a guide listing all the necessary food, medical kits, and winter gear. Hank realizes he has a massive list of supplies to collect before the temperature drops. He opens his banking app and sees he currently has over $15,000 saved. Hank panics as he realizes he barely has enough money to buy survival supplies. Suddenly, a loud notification chime rings out from his phone. Hank looks down at his phone screen in complete confusion. He sees a message stating that an instant online loan was pre-approved. A brilliant idea strikes Hank as he realizes how much easy credit is available. He immediately downloads every fast cash loan app he can find on his phone. Hank grins slyly, knowing he will never have to repay loans after the apocalypse hits. Outside, Mia, angry, kicks an empty can down the pavement in frustration. She stomps away from the store, boiling with rage after Hank ditching her. Mia is deeply offended that Hank actually had the nerve to turn her down. She angrily vows that she will never treat Hank nicely ever again. As she storms down the street, a large black truck suddenly pulls up behind her. Mia turns around in surprise as a loud car horn blares right next to her. A massive pickup truck screeches to a sudden stop right beside her on the street. The truck window rolls down to reveal Hank grinning mischievously at her. Mia gasps in shock, completely stunned to see Hank sitting behind the wheel. She asks if the truck belongs to him, and Hank casually claims he just bought it. Hank lies smoothly, saying his wealthy dad wired him cash after heading to the airport. Mia turns red with embarrassment as she realizes she totally misjudged his earlier actions. She lowers her head sheepishly, feeling guilty for snapping at him without knowing the truth. Tearing up, Mia apologizes for bugging him to go shopping while he was busy. She blushes and admits she was upset because she thought he was ditching her. Hank looks down at her, maintaining his cool and composed attitude. He smiles slyly and tells her she is just being a silly girl. Mia tightly grabs onto Hank's sweater, completely falling for his gentle act. Hank gently holds her chin, telling Mia how much she truly means to him. Mia can barely hide her joy as a sweet smile spreads across her face. Blushing shyly, Mia softly confesses that Hank is extremely special to her too. Hank suddenly turns back to his truck, asking her what she thinks of everything. Mia nervously fidgets with her purse, surprised by his sudden change of subject. She stands there in total shock, completely caught off guard by his sudden move. Hank acts super busy carrying boxes from his truck bed to avoid more questions. He casually mentions buying her a gift while keeping his huge supply hoard secret. Mia happily bids him goodbye, excited to check out her surprise present later. She walks away feeling cherished, completely unaware that she was just manipulated. Hank smirks sinisterly to himself, glad his massive food stockpile remains a secret. Lee carries another delivery box home while walking past people in the street. He knows these supplies are his key to surviving the upcoming frozen apocalypse. He silently vows revenge against those who betrayed and killed him previously. Lee smirks wickedly, eagerly anticipating the arrival of the deadly global freeze. With the apocalypse approaching, the calendar shows temperatures will soon plummet rapidly. Lee successfully finishes receiving and organizing massive shipments of food supplies. He sets down a cardboard box containing hazardous and sensitive equipment. Lee personally hauls sensitive items into his room late at night to avoid suspicion. His apartment piles up with first aid kits, weapons, tools, and bottled water. Next, he buys a generator and stockpiles numerous gas canisters for heat. Workmen reinforce his doors and windows while installing high-powered heating units. Lee checks off his final inventory inside a fully stocked, fortified safe room. Lee takes notes surrounded by his stockpiled supplies just one day before the apocalypse hits. He mentally checks off his preparation list, knowing tomorrow everything will change forever. He finishes preparing a meal made entirely from the plants he managed to grow. Lee sits nervously at his table, ready to test his special plant-growing ability. He gazes at the soybeans and soy milk he produced using his power. Trembling slightly, he scoops up a spoonful of the homegrown beans to eat. He remembers struggling earlier, still unsure how to reliably trigger his plant power. He recalls desperately trying different ways to manifest crops inside his apartment. He cautiously takes a bite to see if his summoned crops are actually edible. He chews and swallows the bite, waiting to judge the taste and safety. Surprised by the decent taste, he finishes half the plate without any issues. Lee realizes his plant ability truly works and can keep him alive during the apocalypse. Lee wonders how his mysterious plant-growing powers actually work in practice. He decides to test if his magical ability works on food other than soybeans. Lee opens his fully stocked fridge to pick out various fruits and vegetables. He gathers many different kinds of fresh produce from his supplies to experiment on. Outside, the sun begins to set over the quiet apartment building as time passes. He successfully uses his glowing green power to rapidly expand a head of broccoli. Lee falls to his knees in pain, overwhelmed by a terrible headache from overusing magic. Pushing his magic past its limits completely exhausts his mind and body. Later, Lee eats a warm plate of cooked soybeans to regain his energy. While chewing his food, he ponders the results of his plant power experiment. Before blacking out, Lee had laid out all his groceries to test his power. He discovered that certain produce failed to react to his green plant power entirely. Lee discovers that some food items react very strongly to his magical energy. However, when he overcharges certain plants, they suddenly explode right in his face. After exploding, the ruined plant turns into a lightweight black chunk that resembles charcoal. To his surprise, these black pieces catch fire easily and burn very well. The burning charcoal produces plenty of steady heat inside a metal bucket. Lee warms his hands happily, relieved that he now has a way to stay warm. He continues practicing his magic power over and over on all the vegetables around him. Eventually, Lee manages to successfully grow a huge fresh head of broccoli. He realizes that the success rate of his magic is still far too random. Lee looks at the broccoli and ponders how to control his strange abilities better. He sets the freshly grown broccoli onto the wooden table. He then sits cross-legged and meditates to control his breathing and energy. Lee focuses his mind by imagining himself walking through a calm and peaceful forest. In his vision, he stands surrounded by friendly forest animals and sunlit woods. He feels deeply connected to nature as he quietly steps through the grass. Lee realizes his plant magic directly links to his natural state of inner consciousness. Surrounding himself with peaceful wildlife, he reaches complete mental harmony to control his energy. Opening his eyes, he successfully channels the green magical energy through his body. Lee smiles proudly as bright green power surges perfectly from his hand. Ready for another test, Lee decides to try using his power on raw meat. He places his glowing green hand on a slab of meat to awaken it. Sitting on the floor, Lee focuses his full concentration directly into the raw steak. He squeezes the meat tight, but no growth or magic happens at all. Disappointed, Lee confirms that his magical ability only works on plant-based items. Lee focuses his mind and senses two distinct types of energy glowing around him. He realizes he has only been using green light and decides to test the red energy instead. Lee closes his eyes and focuses deeply on channeling the mysterious red light into his hand. Holding the piece of raw meat firmly, he prepares to infuse it with his power. Red energy surges out of his hand and flows directly into the raw steak. A sudden bright glow erupts as the meat absorbs the intense red magical energy. The raw meat begins to swell and pulse uncontrollably as the red magic takes effect. Lee recoils in disgust as the meat mutates into a bizarre, writhing, fleshy mass. The mutated lump twitches wildly in his hand, looking completely unnatural and gross. Startled by the creepy creature, Lee quickly throws the strange flesh onto the floor. Curiously, Lee leans down and pokes the bizarre meat monster to see how it responds. He picks up the strange creature to carefully examine what his red power actually created. Lee stares down thoughtfully, wondering how his different magical abilities actually work. He realizes his green magic combines matter, while red magic breaks things down. To test his idea, Lee grabs a small handful of soybeans from a bowl. He holds the piece of meat while preparing to use his magic on the soybeans. Lee focuses his powers to break down the beans and merge them into the meat. Sitting cross-legged, he holds both magic energies to test their balance together. He channels the magic energy directly into the meat, triggering a powerful reaction. A sudden flash of bright light erupts, shocking Lee as energy surges around him. Lee holds up the meat in disbelief after it expands into a massive slab. He looks at his empty hand, amazed that the soybeans completely merged into the meat. Lee sniffs and pokes the large steak, surprised by how fresh and high quality it smells. He realizes in shock that his magical power converted simple soybeans directly into real meat. Hank falls to his knees in frustration after discovering that all his food crops have failed. He sits on the floor surrounded by ruined food, trying to figure out what went wrong. Hank realizes that gaining unique powers is his best chance to produce food and survive. He smirks confidently, determined to unlock incredible abilities during the coming crisis. Hank vows to rise above everyone else and dominate this apocalyptic world. He chuckles happily as he imagines himself standing like a superhero atop a frozen mountain. Snapping back to reality, Hank remembers he needs real weapons before temperatures plummet. Knowing he is currently defenseless, Hank decides he must quickly find weapons to protect himself. Suddenly, Hank looks up in surprise as snow begins falling outside his window. Outside, cold snow covers a statue as the brutal global freeze officially begins. Heavy snow quickly blankets the entire city, signaling that the apocalypse has truly arrived. Hank walks through the snow, knowing he urgently needs to find a gun before winter worsens. He stops when he hears a loud man boasting nearby about huge construction projects. Hank spots Leo, a flashy local contractor who claims to have powerful underground connections. Leo wears heavy gold chains and flashy clothes to act like a wealthy big shot. He brags loudly while offering expensive cigarettes to nearby people to show off his status. Leo is known around the area for handling local contracts and knowing many criminal figures. He acts picky, refusing ordinary favors and claiming he only deals with top-tier people. Leo boasts about working directly for powerful criminal bosses who treat him to luxurious rewards. He talks loudly on his phone, claiming to handle deals worth tens of millions of dollars. Leo struts down the street, putting on a big show about his vast business influence. Hank realizes that Leo's shady connections might be his best chance to buy a firearm. Hank approaches Leo and his companions, determined to negotiate a deal to get a gun. Leo takes a puff of his cigarette and looks confused at the stranger approaching him. Hank waves cheerfully and pretends they are old acquaintances to start a friendly conversation. Leo hesitates on the snowy street and asks Hank if they actually know each other. Hank talks loudly like an old buddy, making excuses about being busy with work lately. Hank looks around nervously to make sure nobody on the street is watching them. Hank leans in close to Leo's ear and whispers his secret request for a gun. Leo reacts in complete shock and asks Hank why he suddenly needs a weapon. Hank smiles sheepishly, looking guilty as he prepares to explain his reason. Leo sternly tells Hank that illegal gun deals are far too dangerous to handle. Hank tries to convince Leo that he only wants a weapon for personal self-defense. Hank shares a memory of riding his bicycle to work next to an annoying stranger. The rude stranger spit directly onto Hank's face while they were riding. Leo explains how the cyclist spat on him after being confronted. Furious, Leo tackled the cyclist to the ground and beat him up. The cyclist threatened to get revenge as he limped away with his bike. The next day, the cyclist returned with a group of armed goons. The gang brutally beat Leo up and warned him never to return. Bruised and humiliated, Leo decided he needed a weapon to protect himself. Hank fumes with anger after hearing about the cyclist spitting on Leo. Leo sighs, realizing Hank completely missed the main point of his story. Hank suddenly puts his hand on Leo's shoulder to show support. Hank offers to call an insider to help Leo buy an illegal gun. Hank complains that his own luxury sports car is currently in the shop. Leo unlocks his large pickup truck and offers to drive them both. Hank rides with Leo in his expensive truck while Leo brags about how much it cost. Leo fixes his blonde hair and takes selfies inside the vehicle. He posts the selfie on social media to flex his expensive lifestyle online. They arrive at a snowy city street where men huddle around a fire for warmth. The local gang members look up as Leo's truck pulls up to the curb. Leo steps out of the truck to greet his acquaintances waiting outside. Leo tells the crew he needs to head inside to see their boss for business. Leo brags to his buddies about his luxury truck while handing out cigarettes. Hank watches Leo silently, amazed by how casually he acts around street thugs. Inside the building, an intimidating gang leader named Victor scowls at Leo's late arrival. Leo nervously offers Victor a cigarette, but the boss angrily demands to hear their business. Leo points to Hank and tells Victor that Hank wants to buy a gun today. Hank gulps nervously, anxiously awaiting the gang leader's response. Victor chuckles, mocking Hank for coming in to buy a firearm. Victor orders his bodyguard to go fetch a weapon from the back. The bodyguard places a pistol on the table and demands $6,000. Hank hesitates, explaining that he actually needs a long-range weapon. He gestures with his hands, specifying he needs something with a scope. Victor quietly smokes his cigarette, staring blankly at Hank. Hank sweats profusely, worried he might have offended the dangerous boss. Victor realizes Hank is asking for a sniper rifle and gets shocked. Victor explodes in anger, shouting that this isn't a shopping mall. Leo jumps in frantically, trying to calm down his enraged boss. Outside, the brutal, freezing blizzard continues to rage over the building. Victor slams his hands on the table in rage, shouting loudly while Leo stands nearby. Hank sweats nervously as he watches Victor explode over the ridiculous request. Victor calms down slightly and agrees to give him a weapon, making Hank smile. Victor orders his guard to prepare a semi-automatic handgun with extra ammunition for Hank. The guard pulls out a sleek black pistol to offer it to Hank. Victor hands the handgun over to Hank so he can defend himself. Hank thinks carefully about the severe blizzard and what information he should share next. Hank mentions that he received insider information about the extreme weather crisis. Hank holds up his phone and warns Victor that official supply limits are starting soon. Victor narrows his eyes sharply as he listens intently to Hank's serious warning. Hank keeps a calm, serious expression while advising Victor to stockpile food immediately. Victor nods in full agreement, realizing the great value of Hank's crucial advice.
Outside on the snowy street, someone yells out that they are heading off first. Angry shouts echo down the frozen road, telling the guys to get lost immediately. Hank walks along the icy pavement alongside Cole, who keeps talking endlessly. Cole rambles on about cigarettes while Hank walks silently through the freezing night air. Hank closes his eyes tightly, getting ready to put his clever plan into action. Hank suddenly slips on the thick ice and spins wildly through the air. He flips completely over and crashes hard into the deep snow right beside Cole. Snow sprays in all directions as Cole stares down in complete shock and concern.
Hank writhes on the frozen ground, loudly complaining that his leg is hurt. He grits his teeth and groans in pain to make his fake fall look real. While lying in the snow, Hank reaches up and holds out his car keys. Cole looks down in surprise as Hank hands him the car keys. Cole carries Hank on his back because he refuses to drive without a license. They slowly trudge together through the deep, freezing snow on foot. Hank gives up and suggests taking a taxi instead, offering to pay for it. They finally reach the hospital building while the heavy blizzard rages outside. The telephone sitting on the hospital reception desk rings loudly. An overworked nurse hurriedly answers the phone call at the front desk. The doctor checks the x-ray scan and tells Hank his leg bone is actually fractured. Hank sits in complete shock after learning his fake injury is a real fracture. Hank looks down at his newly bandaged leg with crutches resting beside him. Hank gives a thumbs up as his friend waves goodbye and leaves the busy hospital lobby. Hank lets out a heavy sigh, feeling completely exhausted by everything that happened today. The hospital emergency room is completely packed with people injured in the sudden severe blizzard. Doctors and nurses rush through crowded hallways filled with emergency beds to treat incoming patients. Hank sits quietly in the waiting room holding his x-ray film while waiting for his medicine. Hank suddenly notices a young nurse walking by and turns around to look at her. Chloe, the young head nurse, carefully checks on a severely wounded patient in the ER. Chloe gives precise medical instructions to her staff while closely reading the patient's vitals monitor. Hank blushes deeply, totally amazed that someone so young can be such a skilled head nurse. Chloe gently comforts an injured child in bed by playing cutely with his stuffed teddy bear. She kneels down right beside the little boy's bed to make sure he feels comfortable. Hank is completely mesmerized by Chloe's incredible beauty and gentle, caring personality. Hank blushes while watching Chloe, thinking she is genuinely pretty. However, he also notices that she is far too naive and clueless. An old man sitting next to Hank suddenly calls Chloe over for help. Chloe politely leans down to assist the old man while Hank watches closely. The old man holds up his phone, asking Chloe to examine a picture. Sweet Chloe smiles warmly, completely oblivious to his sinister motives. The old man leans uncomfortably close to Chloe while complaining about his pain. He suddenly grabs Chloe around her waist and touches her inappropriately. Flustered and confused, Chloe laughs awkwardly, not knowing how to react. The old man grins creepily, taking full advantage of her innocent personality. He pulls Chloe even closer and squeezes her waist inappropriately. Suddenly, a crush flies through the air, swinging straight at the old man. The old creep crashes onto the floor next to the crutch, and Chloe worries if he got hurt. Hank acts innocent and pretends he accidentally lost control of his crutch near the dropped phone. The old man panics immediately and shouts at Hank not to touch his phone. Hank's playful expression turns icy cold as he stands directly over the trembling creep. Hank grabs the phone anyway to check what secrets are hidden inside it. Hank discovers the secret photo the creep took under Chloe's dress. Hank angrily threatens to call security and send the old creep straight to jail. He holds up the screen evidence, threatening to put the creep's face all over the internet. The old man sweats heavily, realizing he has been caught red-handed. Furious and terrified of being arrested, the old man yells out in frustration. The creep turns around and flees the hospital out into the freezing blizzard. Hank is frustrated that Chloe seems completely oblivious to the danger she was just in. Hank shows Chloe the inappropriate photo the old man took, leaving her in complete shock. Hank hands her the tablet and tells her to decide whether to delete the photo or call cops. Instead of panicking about the photo, Chloe cheerfully notices Hank's injured ankle and offers help. Hank screams in sudden pain as Chloe starts tending to his sprained ankle. Chloe gently wraps a bandage around Hank's injured foot to stabilize his ankle. Hank, sitting with crutches, thanks Chloe, relieved that his ankle no longer hurts. Chloe excitedly promises to beat up any creeps, while Hank tells her to be more careful. Hank finds himself getting distracted and blushing as Chloe speaks to him up close. Hank turns bright red as he gets flustered by Chloe's charming and playful presence. A doctor calls for Chloe across the room, interrupting their moment together. Chloe reminds Hank to return in a week for a checkup before running off to work. Hank happily waves goodbye as Chloe walks away down the hallway. Hank thinks about her reminder to return for a checkup in 1 week. He grips his crutch tightly, excited for the chance to see her again. Hank limps out of the clinic doors while the nurses watch him leave. Meanwhile, outside, a freezing blizzard begins to coat the city in snow. A news report on television warns about the sudden heavy snowfall spreading everywhere. The news shows unprecedented snow falling even in normally hot desert countries. Inside his apartment, Hank has a wood stove burning brightly to keep warm. He relaxes on his sofa with a glass of wine while listening to the news. Hank knows the government is lying because he already survived this apocalypse once before. He stays completely calm while the rest of the world starts to panic outside. Hank looks around his room filled with stockpiled food, water, and fuel, ready for anything. Hank relaxes with a glass of wine when his phone suddenly begins buzzing with messages. He feels completely prepared for the freezing weather, confident his food and home are ready. Even as notifications spam his phone, Hank remains calm and continues enjoying his drink. Opening the group chat, Hank sees neighbors panicking over the sudden massive snowfall outside. Hank notices almost every resident in the building is discussing the extreme winter storm. Suddenly, a mysterious user posts that this storm is caused by forces inside the Earth. The stranger warns everyone that a full-blown Ice Age apocalypse is officially beginning. Hank stares at his phone in disbelief, wondering who this unknown person could be. Hank holds his forehead, realizing he must keep a close eye on this stranger. He ponders the strange warning, sensing that this person might know the true danger ahead. Hank checks the apartment complex's online group chat room as residents log in. Inside the digital chat room, dozens of panicked neighbors gather together and create a huge scene. Angry residents shout loudly, demanding an immediate explanation for the sudden extreme cold. The nervous property management team admits there is nothing they can do about the blizzard. Outraged neighbors begin shouting demands for full refunds on their monthly apartment management fees. The crowd turns aggressive and continues pressuring the weak management team for quick solutions. Hank silently watches the chaotic argument unfold while thinking carefully about the situation. Suddenly, the noisy crowd turns their attention towards someone new stepping up to talk. A calm neighbor named Eric points out that shoveling snow during an ongoing blizzard is pointless. The frustrated crowd instantly lashes out at Eric, accusing him of defending the management. Angry neighbors surround Eric, demanding to know why he is taking the staff's side. Eric remains composed and explains he's simply looking at the cold situation realistically. The angry crowd demands to know what Eric thinks they should do instead. Eric explains that clearing local roads won't help if main roads stay blocked. He suggests walking on foot and offers to help clear a small path. Hank silently watches the online group chat to see how people react. The entire group listens quietly as Eric tries to organize a practical plan. An impatient resident shouts that anyone who wants to leave should shovel snow themselves. He loudly complains about wasting his time on manual labor before turning away. The virtual chat room falls into a brief, awkward silence. A boastful resident demands quick action so he can attend an expensive business meeting. Hank recognizes the arrogant neighbor and cringes at his speech. Several neighbors quickly volunteer because they desperately need to buy food. Mia enthusiastically joins the volunteering group, promising to do her best to help. Mia messages the group chat saying she will help clear snow despite feeling unwell. She pretends to cough and acts helpless to gain everyone's pity. The neighbors panic over her illness and beg her not to push herself. They flood the chat with praise, admiring her brave and selfless attitude. Eric presses a button on his phone screen to close the ridiculous chat. Relaxing on his couch, Eric scoffs at how easily Mia deceives the neighbors. Suddenly, a new notification vibrates on Eric's phone screen. Mia sends him a direct message asking why he hasn't contacted her lately. She tells Eric to buy lots of food from the supermarket before coming over. Mia even sends a cute, seductive photo of herself sitting on her bed. The picture shows a flattering close-up shot of her bare feet. Eric rolls his eyes, knowing she is trying to bribe him with her looks for food. Eric rests his bandaged leg while checking the messages on his phone. Desperate for help, Mia uses her foot to quickly send another message to Eric. In the early days of the cold, heating and internet still let people watch videos. Eric scrolls through endless short videos on his phone to kill time indoors. He scratches his head, thinking about how strange this freezing apocalypse is. Normally, severe injuries like broken bones take several months to heal properly. Eric looks down at his cast and feels confused about his own fast recovery. He stumbles upon a news video showing doctors operating on a severely injured patient. The medical clip shows broken bones and organs inside the patient rapidly regenerating. Eric watches in shock, wondering if humans are gaining super healing powers. Suddenly, everything clicks for Eric as he connects the video to his own leg. Eric smiles as a wild idea suddenly pops into his mind. He summons a strange, glowing green energy around his hand. Eric presses his glowing hand against his broken, bandaged leg. The green light vanishes as he checks if his healing power worked. He concentrates again, pushing more green energy into his leg. The glowing light fades once more, leaving his foot feeling better. Exhausted from using his power, Eric lies back on the couch. He opens his mouth wide and lets out a heavy yawn.
Eric slowly closes his eyes and drifts off to sleep. A strange and surreal dream sequence begins inside his mind. In his dream, a wild young boy rides a giant goat through the sky. A massive herd of goats gallops through the air alongside him. Inside his bizarre dream, Eric rides high above a red field alongside a herd of flying goats. Dressed in tribal feathers, Eric happily swings a whip while guiding his winged goat across the sky. Suddenly, the goat rears back sharply and launches Eric right off its back into the air. Eric lands roughly on the ground and painfully snaps his ankle with a loud crack. He collapses into the red grass in agony as a goat approaches to check on him. The goat reaches out and licks Eric's injured leg with its wet tongue. Grossed out by the slobber, Eric pushes the goat's head away with his hand. The goat grows irritated as Eric keeps shoving its face away to guard his leg. Suddenly, the goat extends its long tongue and wraps it tightly around Eric's ankle. The goat whips its powerful tongue backward and yanks Eric's leg high into the air. Eric gets completely flipped upside down onto his back as the goat hoists his leg up. Green magical energy sparks wildly around a foot as raw magic begins to flow. The glowing green energy quickly dissolves the tight cloth wrapped around the injured skin. Lee suddenly snaps awake in horror, gasping heavily from a terrible nightmare. He sits upright on the sofa and breathes hard to catch his racing breath. Sweat drips down his face while he tries to understand what just happened to him. Suddenly, a bright green light sparks to life beside him on the sofa. Lee watches in utter disbelief as green magical aura wraps around his bandaged leg. The old cloth bandages snap into pieces and fall directly onto the floor. He tentatively places his bare foot onto the floor and feels no pain at all. Holding scissors, Lee realizes with joy that his broken leg is completely healed. He walks over into the kitchen to see what else his new power can do. Looking down at his tools, Lee decides to test his magical powers once again. Lee holds a sharp kitchen knife, hesitating for a moment before testing his magical powers. He carefully presses the steel blade against his finger to cut his hand on purpose. Blood trickles from the fresh cut, making Lee wince in pain from the blade. Bright green magic surges around his hand, instantly closing the wound and stopping the blood. Lee grins happily after confirming that his magical green power really possesses incredible healing abilities. Outdoors, residents gather in the freezing cold to shovel thick snow around the complex. Uncle Luke thanks twin brothers Zach and Cole for doing most of the hard shoveling work. Zach and Cole smile happily under their warm winter hats as they hear the praise. The blushing twins wave their hands modestly, feeling proud to help out their neighbors. Suddenly, a girl walking nearby loses her balance and crashes loudly into a snowbank. Zach and Cole hurry over to help the fallen young woman get back onto her feet. Zach pulls the pink-gloved girl back onto her feet after she slips on the ice. Chloe smiles brightly and thanks the twins for helping her stand up in the snow. The twin brothers tell Chloe to call them whenever she needs help in the neighborhood. Nearby, an elderly security guard takes a slow puff from his cigarette while thinking. The guard tells Lee that a mysterious resident brought in heavy supplies earlier today. He says the person unloaded large gas tanks and fireplaces from a small truck. Lee believes the new neighbor is just renovating their home for the severe winter. Meanwhile, Zach and Cole finish shoveling the snow so residents can walk outside safely. Suddenly, a creepy man sneaks up from behind and puts his arms around the twins. Without hesitation, one of the twins turns around and smashes snow directly into his face. Tina yells at Todd to stop slacking off and get back to shoveling snow. Tina shuts down Todd's excuses while Zach and Cole quietly slip away. Lee checks his phone and announces that the main path has finally been cleared. Chloe cheers happily, glad that their hard shoveling work is finally finished.
Zach and Cole check their phones and decide to message Hank about buying supplies. The old guard asks Lee if he thinks everything happening is linked to the storm. Lee adjusts his glasses in silence, thinking carefully about the guard's question. Lee calmly reassures the guard that he is not concerned about it at all. The old guard laughs, agreeing that smart young people always know best. Suddenly, violent icy winds blow heavily between the tall apartment buildings. Lee holds his umbrella tight as the freeze suddenly hits much harder. Everyone struggles to walk through the freezing blizzard as snow fills the air.
Outside, snow falls heavily while loud knocking rattles against Lee's bright window. Lee wakes up groggily on his couch, startled by the urgent knocking at the door. Someone keeps banging on the door, demanding Lee to wake up and let him inside. Groggy and tired, Lee throws on his winter coat and opens the door. Cole stands outside with a grin, carrying the heavy weapon case Lee requested. Cole explains that he successfully brought the semi-automatic rifle Lee had asked for. Lee happily takes the heavy gun bag inside, pleased with his new weapon. Cole smokes a cigarette and mentions that the supermarket was completely wiped out overnight. He complains that someone stole every last item before anyone else could buy food. Lee realizes that people are already panicking as the severe cold storm worsens. He nods quietly, aware that the struggle for survival has officially begun. Lee returns home carrying the heavy rifle case on his back. He wonders how someone could clear out an entire supermarket in just one night. He remembers reading about superhumans who could store objects in alternate dimensions. In fiction, individuals with spatial powers could easily carry massive amounts of supplies. Lee starts to wonder if someone in the real world unlocked a spatial power. The idea that another person might possess superpowers deeply unsettles Lee. Sitting on his couch, Lee reviews his own special growing abilities. His power allows him to duplicate or accelerate the growth of food items. He picks up a single soybean from a large bowl to test his power. He considers how his success rate varies depending on the type of food. Green energy glows around his hand as he activates his magical ability. Lee startles as a sudden blast of green energy erupts from his palm. He looks down solemnly, realizing he accidentally used way too much power. The soybean is reduced to a piece of useless black charcoal in his hands. Lee grips the burnt lump, determined to master his plant growth power today. He keeps practicing endlessly as the clock ticks late into the night. Finally, a healthy green plant begins to sprout and flourish before his eyes. Lee holds up the fully grown plant, now packed with fresh soybean pods. Exhausted and drenched in sweat, Lee rests beside a massive pile of burnt waste. Sitting on the sofa, Lee realizes that his green energy fluctuates while working. He analyzes the precise power output needed to grow plants without destroying them. If he pushes the energy past its critical limit, the seed turns to charcoal. Lee inspects a small seed, pleased that he finally mastered controlling his plant power. Eric compares his energy control technique to a classic arcade dancing rhythm game. He holds a tiny glowing green seed while carefully tracking the moving rhythm arrows. Eric meditates shirtless and focuses his energy to hit every timing meter accurately. After hitting a perfect streak, he successfully grows a huge leafy green plant. Next, Eric stands in his kitchen with giant piles of chicken legs and beans. He recalls a bad experience where eating raw food made him vomit black liquid. Eric reasons that absorbing meat energy should follow the exact same rhythm principles. He holds a raw chicken leg against his chest, surrounded by stacks of raw food. Colorful, glowing energy swirls around his hands as he starts extracting the meat energy. Eric fails the rhythm prompt, causing painful black liquid to burst from his body. Determined to succeed, Eric attempts the rhythm absorption process once again. He misses the timing again as black liquid spurts out from his chest. Eric fails the timing on the rhythm game, splashing dark sludge everywhere in frustration. Snow continues to blow violently outside his apartment window. The gross black liquid spills across the kitchen counter and pools on the floor. Eric sits silently in the messy room, preparing to try again with raw meat. Glowing rhythm arrows appear around his hand as he grips the chicken leg tightly. He carefully tracks the moving target arrows to avoid making another mistake. Eric narrows his eyes in intense focus, waiting for the exact right moment. He hits the exact timing, releasing a sudden burst of energy onto the meat. The raw chicken leg rapidly expands into a gigantic piece of meat. Eric smirks with satisfaction after finally getting the power move right. He collapses onto his back on the floor, totally spent from the effort. Eric lies on the ground, panting heavily, completely exhausted from using his skill. Eric slowly wakes up on his couch after collapsing from complete physical exhaustion. He opens his eyes as the news broadcast advises everyone to wait for official support. Eric stretches and realizes society is starting to fall apart just like in his past life. Suddenly, his phone rings continuously with urgent notifications from his building's chat group. He looks at the screen and sees neighbors complaining that government emergency lines are down. Eric sits up on the couch to carefully check what his neighbors are saying. He taps his phone screen and opens the virtual chat room for apartment residents.
The online room loads up, displaying a crowded virtual space filled with neighbor avatars. The neighbors are arguing loudly over whether to wait for help or try escaping. Panic quickly spreads as everyone in the chat room shouts over one another. An older, vocal resident steps into the center of the room to command attention. Uncle Luke firmly tells the crowd that if help were coming, rescuers would be here already. Uncle Luke explains that government rescue forces are not coming to save them. He warns everyone that military tanks are moving out because war is starting. The entire chat room falls quiet as his words shock the residents. The panicked neighbors listen in disbelief as the terrifying news sinks in. A tense silence covers the virtual gathering area after the sudden announcement. Anxious neighbors crowd around Uncle Luke to ask him more questions. Eric watches silently, remembering how these events played out in his previous life. Victor steps forward and insists everyone must work together to survive. Sitting near his heater, Victor types a message urging people to share supplies. He offers to donate half of his own food supplies to get started. The neighbors whisper among themselves, still hesitant to share what they have. In the chat room, Victor tries to convince everyone to band together during this freezing crisis. Victor points out Mia, questioning why she refuses to contribute any of her food. Mia angrily replies, asking if he is picking on her because she rejected him before. Sitting by her small heater, Mia frantically types on her phone to defend herself. She sends a message claiming she genuinely has no extra food left in her apartment. The chat erupts into arguments as neighbors debate whether pooling food is actually fair. Many residents express doubt, worrying that no one can guarantee honesty or equal trust. Despite the doubts, several people step up and agree to donate food and warm clothes. Victor then proposes appointing a small committee of leaders to manage all the supplies. The residents quickly establish an interim committee to take charge of the pooled resources. Hank smirks at his phone, recalling how this same committee formed in his past life. Meanwhile, the extreme freeze causes the building's central heating system to completely break down. Outside, freezing residents burn books in trash cans just to stay warm. Meanwhile, Hank's apartment stays hot thanks to his burning fireplace and endless coal supply. He sits back with delicious strawberry cake and cold drinks, playing video games in comfort. As Hank enjoys his feast and games, his phone suddenly starts ringing. The committee calls to demand that he come downstairs to help clear snow. Hank is annoyed, but he decides not to cause unnecessary conflict with the neighbors yet. He puts on a heavy jacket and grabs a shovel to join the group. Downstairs, the residents gather around the entrance doors completely buried in deep snow. The leaders prepare everyone to shove the frozen doors open together. Hank lines up with the men as they get ready to push on 3. The moment the doors burst open, a violent, freezing wind blows snow straight inside. The icy storm instantly blasts into the lobby, freezing everything in its path. The freezing wind blows directly into the lobby, making everyone shiver uncontrollably. Hank shields his face as the icy gusts sting his eyes and face. Hank crouches down to stay warm, realizing going outside could be fatal. Suddenly, a flashy guy steps forward through the doorway into the cold. A cocky guy named Zach holds a cigarette and tries to look tough. Zach struts forward, claiming a strong attitude is all they need. The other residents freeze in place while watching Zach push ahead. Hank stays low on the floor, waiting to see what happens next. Zach takes a slow drag from his cigarette before taking action. Zach lets out a loud shout to pump himself up. He thrusts his gloved hand directly into the thick bank of snow. Zach aggressively punches the massive snow wall to show off his strength. Outside the glass doors, a man desperately rushes through the deep snow to reach the building. 2 residents watch through the frost as someone squeezes through the narrow opening in the snow-blocked doors. The harsh, freezing wind blasts indoors as the door is forced open amidst the roaring blizzard outside. A young man stumbles inside, freezing cold with turning blue skin from exposed freezing temperatures. The heavy doors immediately slam shut behind him to block out the dangerous freezing blizzard winds. The poor guy collapses onto the cold floor covered in snow, shivering uncontrollably as neighbors rush over. Leo kneels down to hold the shivering man, worried about his severe hypothermia from the extreme cold. Meanwhile, down in the parking garage, mysterious figures quietly move through the dimly lit underground corridors. Signs point towards the elevator and stairwell as people gather down in the warm underground basement. More residents head inside from the cold, seeking shelter together in the safe underground parking area. Uncle Luke addresses the crowd, instructing everyone to wait inside until the heavy blizzard outside calms down. Leo keeps a close eye on the crowd, suspecting that dangerous strangers might be lurking among them. Kyle stares closely, recognizing the man who started the shady community committee. The speaker warmly thanks all the residents for supporting his new committee.
He asks everyone to share their resources to help other struggling families survive. The neighbors talk among themselves, convinced that staying united is their best choice. Kyle stays quiet, knowing that blindly trusting this committee will lead to regret. He walks through the crowded garage while keeping an eye on his surroundings. Suddenly, a noise behind him makes Kyle stop and turn around in surprise. He notices the young nurse carrying a huge stack of heavy cardboard boxes. She stumbles through the dense crowd, struggling to keep her heavy packages balanced. She loses her footing completely and cries out as the boxes begin to fall.
Kyle quickly catches her in his arms before she can hit the cold ground. She looks up in shock and recognizes Kyle, asking him about his healed leg. Kyle gets completely flustered as Chloe brings up how she recognizes him. Kyle nervously waves his hands around, trying to calm Chloe down as she chats happily. Chloe looks up at him with wide, curious eyes from beneath her animal hood. Chloe cheers with excitement, thrilled that she ran into Kyle in the garage. Kyle proudly offers to carry the boxes for her, insisting that he is strong. Chloe blushes cheerfully and hands the stack of boxes over to Kyle.
Kyle's eyes widen in absolute shock as the massive weight lands in his hands. Kyle struggles to keep his stance while his arms tremble under the heavy load. Trembling beneath the heavy weight, Kyle awkwardly asks Chloe what is inside the boxes. Chloe laughs playfully and offers to take the heavy boxes back from him. Kyle tries to act tough and pretend he is not struggling at all. Chloe brags that she is actually much stronger than most guys. She blushes shyly and hints that there is a secret behind her power. Kyle gets curious and asks her what she means by that. Chloe gets flustered and quickly waves her hands to change the topic. Kyle brings up that he still does not know her full name. They continue walking through the garage as she prepares to introduce herself. Kyle exhales a warm breath into the freezing air while waiting. Chloe blushes deeply and gives him her full name with a smile. She politely holds her hands together and bows with respect. Kyle nods in realization now that he finally knows who she is. Chloe happily walks alongside Kyle as he carries the heavy boxes. Suddenly, Chloe stumbles and accidentally bumps right into Kyle's side. She gasps in surprise as she presses up against him. Her body bumps firmly against his waist while he holds the boxes. Kyle feels her press softly against his arm. His face turns bright red from the sudden close contact. Chloe apologizes nervously, and Kyle quietly reassures her that it is fine. Suddenly, Hannah walks up in her winter coat and greets Kyle. Hannah comes close and affectionately hugs onto Kyle's arm. She glances at Chloe and asks Kyle who his friend is. Embarrassed by the awkward situation, Chloe quickly runs away with her boxes. Kyle turns to Hannah and asks why she suddenly showed up down here.
Hannah explains she came for supplies because Kyle never replied to her message. Kyle scratches his neck awkwardly, realizing he completely forgot to answer her text. Hannah blushes sweetly and asks if she can head up to his apartment. She holds her hands together pleadingly, explaining that her food supplies are almost out. Kyle gives her a sly smirk, realizing he now holds all the leverage. He teasingly asks if she wants to stay over at his place for a few days. Before she can respond, Kyle suddenly pulls Hannah into a tight, warm embrace. Hannah's eyes widen in complete shock as Kyle holds her close against him. Totally flustered, Hannah nervously stammers that they can just talk online instead. Kyle chuckles at her cute reaction while Hannah stands there completely stunned and embarrassed. Hannah gently tugs on Kyle's sleeve, asking him for a bit more time. She claims she does not want others thinking she is only with him for his money. Kyle listens intently while Hannah puts on a sweet and innocent act. Inside, Kyle fumes with rage, remembering how she betrayed and killed him in his past life. He knows he must keep acting along to replay his previous life's events. His goal is to let Hannah bring her secret partner right into his trap again. Putting on a friendly smile, Kyle tells Hannah he was only teasing her about staying over. Hannah is completely taken aback by his sudden change of attitude. Kyle promises to bring her extra food supplies tomorrow, putting her mind at ease. She smiles brightly and waves goodbye, thinking she successfully tricked him. As Hannah turns away, a sinister grin spreads across her face. She walks off, unaware that Kyle is actually orchestrating her downfall. Hank scoffs in amusement as he watches his neighbor foolishly try to punch through the frozen wall. Meanwhile, Hannah's text messages flood his phone, demanding to know where her promised supplies are. His phone keeps ringing incessantly as Hannah gets more furious at him for ignoring her. Hank ignores his ringing phone and prepares to eat a warm bowl of glazed steak over rice. He takes a huge, satisfying bite of the juicy meat, enjoying every single chew. Hank feels pure bliss relaxing in his warm apartment while enjoying a hot, delicious meal. While eating, Hank reflects on two crucial rules about food from his past life. He recalls hoarding piles of raw meat in his previous life without properly preparing it. Uncooked meat was far less effective, giving him only half of its true energy back then. Eating hot-cooked meals now gives him full power and satisfaction to thrive in the apocalypse. Hank imagines a world where his steak can duplicate itself endlessly. He loves the idea of having an endless supply of fresh meat. If his food multiplied, he would never go hungry during the apocalypse. Hank smiles warmly, confident that his massive food stockpile keeps him completely safe. Drinking wine on his couch, Hank knows the disaster outside is worse than media reports. Hank walks over to his large living room window and pulls back the curtain. He looks out to see a frozen city rocked by massive, smoky explosions. Helicopters fly through the heavy blizzard as military control crumbles across the snowy city. Hank checks his phone while quietly watching the chaotic situation unfolding down below. Outside, desperate neighbors offer stacks of useless cash just to buy tiny food packages. Fights quickly break out as starving men grab each other violently over basic supplies. Hank hears that free food is being handed out in the building's basement parking garage. He decides to head down to the basement parking lot to investigate what is happening. The freezing cold air hits Hank hard as he enters the crowded underground parking garage. Hank shivers in the extreme cold, wishing he was back inside his warm apartment. Desperate neighbors push and yell at each other in line while Hank watches quietly. Hank remembers past riots here and is surprised the organizers are actually giving away food. A large setup is organized in the parking lot with tons of stacked food supplies. Hank walks through the crowd to inspect how the group manages to distribute everything smoothly. He watches a frustrated resident argue with an organizer over receiving such a small ration. An angry neighbor slams his hand down, demanding to take back the food he previously donated. The organizer apologizes and promises to pay him back in cash once the disaster ends. The surrounding crowd becomes angry with the man and starts shouting at him to behave. People in line scream at him for delaying everyone while they wait to get food. The crowd calls him shameless for trying to take back supplies during a winter crisis. Hank silently watches, knowing the committee will never give back donated supplies in this situation. The freezing neighbors look on anxiously as the argument continues to disrupt the ration line. Hank agrees with a neighbor beside him that asking for return donations is completely absurd. Suddenly, a familiar blonde guy named Zach notices Hank and waves at him cheerfully. Zach tries to act relaxed while greeting Hank, claiming that his life is going okay. Hank notices that Zach is actually struggling badly and trembling uncontrollably in the freezing garage. Hank calls him out for claiming he is fine while he clearly shivers from the cold. Zach admits he has been drinking water just to stop his stomach pains. Suddenly, Zach's stomach loudly growls, proving he is actually starving. Zach explains that he donated most of his supplies to the local committee. Because he gave so much away, his home food supply completely ran out. Hank listens quietly as Zach describes his desperate situation with chapped lips. Hank smirks slightly as a clever idea pops into his mind. Hank puts an arm around Zach and leans in to offer him a deal. Zach is shocked that Hank is offering 4 instant noodles and 2 sausages. Tears of joy stream down Zach's face as he vows eternal gratitude. Hank pats him gently and invites Zach over to his place to eat. Both men trade enthusiastic thumbs up as Zach eagerly heads out to help. Hank grins, satisfied that Zach will solve his problem for him. Zach turns around cheerfully, expecting a warm greeting from his friend Mia in the crowd. Before he can say another word, a sudden hand strikes out violently toward him. Mia unexpectedly slaps Zach hard across the face in front of everyone. Zach stands completely frozen in shock as his cheek stings from the hit. Mia glares at him furiously, screaming that he has deeply disappointed her. The surrounding crowd stops to watch the tense confrontation unfold in the hallway. Zach can barely process what just happened as his red cheek burns with pain. He touches his bruised face, feeling humiliated by her sudden, unprovoked attack. He thinks back and realizes she physically struck him for no real reason at all. Zach's gaze turns dark and sinister as he angrily vows never to let anyone bully him again. Mia stares at Zach in shock, demanding to know how he could let her down. Zach lets out a cold breath, carefully keeping his intense anger under control. He looks at her indifferently and pretends that all his supplies were stolen. Mia screams in complete disbelief after hearing that his food stash is gone. Zach plays along, claiming he barely has enough food left for a few days. Mia's eyes widen with sudden excitement when she hears he still has a bit left. He tells her he can only afford to eat one tiny meal every single day. Mia happily claps her hands together, overjoyed that he still has some food remaining. She greedily demands that Zach cut his meals in half to share with her. Zach stares at her in total disbelief, shocked by her shameless and selfish request. He realizes that Mia has always seen him as nothing more than a tool. Zach smirks to himself, secretly planning to make her suffer for her arrogance. Lee smiles softly as his warm breath turns into mist in the freezing air. Chloe smiles sweetly and asks Lee to bring some food down to her room. She turns around to leave, telling Lee not to make her wait too long. Lee waves goodbye and tells her to wait for him later that night. Outside, a violent blizzard rages endlessly across the frozen apartment complex. Heavy snow buries the quiet buildings as the cold becomes even more intense. Later that night, Chloe furiously texts Lee, demanding to know where her food is. Chloe shivers in the freezing lobby, angry that Lee's ignoring her calls. Realizing Lee was standing her up, Chloe glances toward the stairwell in frustration. She peers up into the dark, icy staircase leading to the upper floors. Chloe stomps her boots and begins marching up the cold concrete stairs. She curses Lee while climbing, determined to get her hands on his supplies. Exhausted and starving, Chloe forces herself to keep climbing the freezing staircase. She finally reaches the 16th floor and feels relieved to be close to Lee's apartment. Suddenly, the light fixture above her shuts off with a sharp snap. Chloe panics when she realizes the emergency lights are completely broken. Dark shadows loom above her in the pitch-black stairwell. Terrified, she calls out into the darkness to ask who was up there. Suddenly, a heavy black trash bag tumbles down from the top landing. Chloe looks up in terror as the heavy bag falls straight toward her head. The heavy bag crashes right onto her with a sudden loud bang. A massive cloud of white dust and garbage bursts everywhere. Chloe collapses onto the floor, coughing frantically, covered in dirty waste. Furious and covered in trash, she screams Lee's name at the top of her lungs. Lee spilled flour all over Chloe in the dark stairwell, leaving her covered in white dust. Lee explained that he tripped in the sudden darkness and dropped his bag of flour. Chloe wiped the flour off her hair and yelled at Lee in complete disgust. Lee smirked and told her that he had prepared a special gift just for her. He handed her a black plastic bag, claiming it contained his final food supplies. Chloe opened the bag and was shocked to see it filled with moldy, rotten food scraps. Lee casually scratched his head and said those rotten leftovers were all he had to eat. Chloe held up a piece of spoiled food and angrily asked if it was even edible. When Lee offered to take the food bag back, Chloe suddenly hesitated to return it. She quickly pulled the bag away, yelling that she never actually said she refused it. Lee watched her clutch the filthy trash with a dark, cold look in his eyes. He silently laughed at how he used to treat such a greedy woman like a goddess. Chloe holds onto the bag tightly, determined not to let go of her food scraps. She inspects a rotten apple, believing she can still eat it after peeling the skin. She even tries to gather the spilled flour, desperate for anything to eat. Lee watches her scramble for trash, amused by how desperate she has become. Chloe carefully grabs her bag of spoiled food and turns around to leave. As Chloe walks away, Lee knows that rotten trash will give her a terrible stomachache. Lee smirks with satisfaction, feeling happy that his cruel trick worked. He cheerfully hums a tune while walking back toward his warm apartment. Suddenly, Lee freezes in his tracks as a strange thought crosses his mind. He pauses quietly in the dark hallway, wondering if he should check again. Lee turns around and decides to head back out to take another look. He steps through the door and follows the faint sound of footsteps.
Lee turns around and marches back toward where Chloe is standing. He picks up speed and rushes forward with heavy steps. Lee aggressively grabs Chloe by her jacket collar from behind. He slams her down onto the cold ground to confront her. Lee suddenly freezes when he realizes that Chloe is actually a girl. He pauses in total shock, staring at her in disbelief. Chloe quietly lies on the floor and stares back at Lee. Lee smirks, noticing that she refuses to speak a word. He leans down and orders her to strip off all her clothes.
Lee glares at Chloe, trying to decide if he should actually take her warm clothes. He hesitates as Chloe stays completely silent on the floor without defending herself. Lee decides to show mercy and steps back from her on the cold floor. He turns his back on her and starts walking away down the hallway. Suddenly, Lee stops walking when he feels someone tugging on his winter jacket. He turns around in surprise and sees Chloe holding tightly onto his sleeve. Chloe silently stares up at him with a quiet look behind her glasses. She raises her hand and points down the hallway toward a closed door. Lee realizes she wants him to follow her as she gently pulls his arm. Chloe slowly opens the heavy door leading into a hidden room. Lee steps inside the room and looks around with a shocked face. He discovers a warm shelter fully stocked with heaters and piles of supplies. Lee stands stunned as Chloe waddles around her messy room in oversized clothes. She fixes her clothes while Lee continues to look at her in utter shock. Chloe explains that her mathematical calculations predicted the sudden ice age. Lee realizes Chloe is the smart outcast from the group chat who warned everyone.
Lee is blown away by how intelligent she really is. He asks her why she brought him into her secret survival room. Without saying a word, Chloe points her finger right at Lee. A screen lights up behind them, catching Lee's attention. The video feed shows security footage of Lee moving supply boxes into the elevator. Another recording shows workers delivering gas cylinders to Lee's home. Lee realizes in shock that Chloe has been spying on him this whole time. Chloe casually confirms it while stripping off her warm clothes, leaving Lee completely speechlessly shocked. Zach starts sweating inside the warm apartment while wearing his heavy winter coat. Hannah complains about the heat and begins stripping off her sweater, flustering Zach. Zach panics in embarrassment and desperately tells her to stop taking off her clothes. After settling down, Hannah interrogates Zach about his supplies while typing on her laptop. Zach gets confused when Hannah suddenly mentions working together to survive. Before he can react, Hannah suddenly reaches onto the sofa right next to him. She crawls directly across his lap, bringing her body unexpectedly close to Zach. Zach blushes furiously and shouts in shock as Hannah leans directly over him. Instead of anything romantic, Hannah simply reaches over to grab a heavy machine. She calmly explains to a completely bewildered Zach that it is a power generator. The large power generator begins vibrating and humming loudly on the floor. Zach sits beside Hannah in total disbelief as the noisy machine runs between them. Hannah looks closely at Zach and asks if he needs anything else done. Zach pauses thoughtfully while Hannah waits quietly to hear his response. Zach shows Hannah how to operate the water heater in the bathroom. Zach grabs supplies from the fridge and asks Hannah to help him out. Zach turns on the gas tank under the stove while Hannah watches. Zach cooks food in a flaming wok while telling Hannah to check the rice. A fresh spread of cooked meat, tofu, and rice is prepared. Beautifully cooked dishes are laid out ready for them to eat. Zach and Hannah sit down at the low coffee table to eat dinner. Zach slaps his forehead, complaining that he feels like a full-time babysitter. Zach slams the table while complaining about her inability to care for herself. Hannah stares back blankly with her mouth full of food, utterly clueless. Zach awkwardly laughs and tells Hannah that he was only joking about leaving. He quietly takes another bite of his meal using his chopsticks. Zach says he will leave after eating, but Hannah suddenly collapses onto the table. Hannah slumps over the table, fast asleep before finishing her food. Zach stares at her in total disbelief, amazed that she fell asleep mid-bite. He carefully lifts Hannah onto the couch and tucks her in under a warm blanket. Zach zips up his jacket to leave, sighing that taking care of her feels like raising a kid. Early the next morning, a loud knock echoes from Zach's front door. A fierce winter blizzard continues to howl outside the snowy apartment building. A sleepy Zach opens the door, wondering why someone is knocking so early. He is stunned to see Hannah standing in the hallway with a huge tower of boxed supplies. Hannah stares up at him quietly, delivering the massive pile of gifts to his doorstep. Hannah asks Zach if he can give her another cooking lesson. Zach sits on the floor with Hannah to explain how to use the cooking equipment. Zach panics and quickly covers Hannah when her clothes begin to slip off. Hannah starts cooking on the stove, accidentally creating a giant flame in the pan. Despite the dark dish, Zach admits her cooking skills have actually improved.
They sit down together to eat and talk about surviving during the apocalypse. While eating, Zach remembers there's something he still needs to ask her. Hannah responds with a strange, dramatic line that completely confuses Zach. Zach pauses and decides it is better not to press for a real answer. Zach tells Hannah to pretend he never asked and continues eating his food. Meanwhile, outside, a group of angry men violently knocks over a box of supplies. Desperate survivors scramble and fight each other on the ground for any food scraps. Desperate survivors scream and violently fight each other to grab a single box of supplies.
The chaotic crowd shouts loudly, refusing to surrender any of their gathered food and supplies. Fights burst out everywhere, while desperate people threaten to kill anyone who tries to rob them. One angry survivor savagely punches another man in the face, sending blood flying onto the floor. A well-dressed man steps directly into the fresh blood splattered across the cold floor. Victor calmly exhales while watching the violent mob lose complete control. He presses a button on a high-powered speaker device to turn the volume to maximum. A painful sound wave blasts from the speaker, forcing everyone in the crowd to drop and cover their ears.
The painful noise forces the survivors to clutch their ears in agony. Victor speaks into a megaphone, asking the mob if they have fought enough. He tells them it is foolish to fight to the death over tiny scraps. The angry survivors shout back that they must fight or starve to death. Victor taps his temple calmly as he listens to the mob complain. He continues speaking over the megaphone while the crowd slowly quiets down. Victor smiles coldly and asks if they actually deserve to starve to death. He scolds them for creating such a chaotic situation in the first place.
An angry survivor steps forward and furiously glares at Victor. Victor reaches down and picks up a piece of dry bread from the floor. He crushes the hard bread in his fist, crumbling it in front of them. Victor steps near the crumbs, scolding the survivors for wasting their last food. The armed men listen quietly as Victor calls their internal fighting completely foolish. He gestures to the crowd, asking why they turn on each other instead of uniting. Victor faces the gathered crowd and asks why they accept starving to death. He reminds them that wealthy hoarders stay warm while regular people freeze.
Speaking through his megaphone, Victor loudly asks the group if that is fair. He raises a fist, shouting that they must unite and reclaim what is theirs. Victor urges everyone to stop fighting each other and direct their anger outward. The angry survivors shout back, agreeing that they've been treated unfairly. Behind his glasses, Victor watches intently as his speech sways the entire crowd. The mob pumps their fists in rage, demanding their fair share of food. Everyone joins together, fully ready to take back the supplies they need. Outside, a sinister leader smirks as he directs the angry crowd to raid apartments for food. Neighbors carrying weapons gather in the freezing cold, ready to break down doors for survival. A frightened resident checks his phone, realizing the crowd outside has completely lost its mind. Inside his warm apartment, Hank wakes up when his phone suddenly starts ringing non-stop. Hank checks the group chat and reads terrifying news about neighbors breaking into people's homes. He panics in shock after learning that the armed gang is going door to door right now. Hank quickly latches his front door and draws his thick curtain shut to hide inside. Standing quietly in his darkened apartment, he carefully monitors the dangerous situation outside. He clenches his fist in concern, knowing he must keep his massive food stash a secret. Hank realizes that if the organized mob discovers his stockpiles, they will target him next. He imagines a horde of starving neighbors breaking through his door and tearing him apart. Hank walks into his heavily stockpiled storage room, determined to stay fully prepared for any attack. Hank gathers 2 fire extinguishers and electrical supplies to construct a defensive trap at his front door. He uses tape and foil to attach live electrical wires directly onto his apartment door handle. Hank steps back and inspects the electrified door handle trap he built to protect his home. Suddenly, the apartment darkens as the central power grid in the building shuts down completely. A severe blizzard sweeps across the city, plunging all the high-rise buildings into total darkness. Snow and ice cover the complex, cutting off power to the entire surrounding neighborhood. Panicked neighbors yell across balconies when they realize the blackout covers all nearby apartment blocks. Cell phone signals vanish completely, leaving the frozen residents trapped without any outside communication. Hank looks through his thick curtains into the dark night, knowing total panic will soon begin.
He carries a heavy red fuel canister over to his personal backup generator near the fireplace. Hank carefully pours fuel into his generator to ensure his apartment stays warm and powered up. Loud banging rattles the door, startling a well-dressed neighbor. He and a woman in a heavy coat listen nervously to the pounding. Violent thuds echo loudly through the dark hallway. Outside, the shadow of an armed intruder holding a spiked bat looms. Meanwhile, Hank's cozy shelter remains warm thanks to his working generator. Hank walks over to his heavy front door to adjust his trap. He tests the wire with a probe to see if power is flowing.
Sparks suddenly explode right in his face as the line short-circuits. The fried wire sits on the floor emitting thick smoke. Hank coughs from the fumes and struggles with the tricky wiring. Suddenly, someone bangs hard on Hank's front door handle. Hank cautiously approaches his front door to check who is outside. Looking through the peephole, he sees a person standing right at his door. He spots Chloe through the glass, desperately crying out for help. Hank reaches for the door lock, hesitating to let her inside. He remembers how ruthless looters are using trickery to breach apartments. Hank decides not to take any chances and pulls his hand back. He opens the door slightly and warns Chloe that looters are raiding apartments. Hank closes the door shut, leaving Chloe outside in the freezing corridor. Chloe quietly knocks on his door again, begging him to let her in. Hank stays quiet inside, leaving Chloe sitting curled up against the door. She blows on her frozen hands to stay warm in the bitter cold. Chloe panics as violent looters shout and approach her down the hallway. A band of armed looters quietly reaches Hank's floor, looking for apartments to raid. The leader notes that nobody has searched this floor yet and decides to target the doors. The gang agrees to raid the 2 apartment units on this floor. The leader asks his crew member to hand him a crowbar to break inside. Inside, Hank holds Chloe tight and covers her mouth while the looters fake a friendly voice outside. Hank keeps Chloe completely silent so the intruders outside do not hear them. Heavy pounding shakes the door as the gang attempts to force their way in. Hank sits on the floor holding Chloe while loud bangs echo against the door. Hank whispers to Chloe that his door is reinforced and will protect them. Chloe stays terrified and motionless while Hank keeps his hand over her mouth. The looters aggressively rattle the metal handle, trying to snap the lock open. Unable to break in, the looters mark Hank's door and move to the neighboring apartment. Hank remembers hiring a worker to reinforce his front door with a thick iron plate. Hank lets go of Chloe and nervously apologizes for holding her so tightly. Chloe looks down shyly and prepares to express her gratitude. Chloe softly thanks Hank for keeping her safe during the scary situation. Hank sighs with relief and tells Chloe that the dangerous intruders have left. Hank grabs wire cutters and decides to build an electric defense trap for the door. Hank tries installing the electric wires but quickly gets confused by the setup. Hank struggles with the cables and admits he does not fully understand how it works. Chloe suddenly speaks up and explains how voltage differences work, surprising Hank. Chloe guides Hank step by step on how to wrap the bare wire around the handle. Hank connects the cables to the circuit box and turns on the main power. Hank tests the door handle with a voltage meter and sees that the shock trap works. Hank instantly regrets asking Mia a question after she starts blabbering about dark magic powers. Mia follows Hank around his messy room, demanding to know how she can assist him. She unloads a pile of random personal items from under her cloak while complaining to Hank. Mia calmly announces that she will be moving into Hank's apartment starting right now. Hank freezes in utter disbelief and yells at her for making such a crazy statement. Hank orders Mia to gather her things and return to her own home immediately. As Hank tries to confront her, his feet get caught in thick electrical cables on the floor. Hank trips hard over the tangled wires and completely loses his balance. Hank crashes straight into a pile of supplies, sending items flying all over the room. Hank groans on the floor while a strange purple glow unexpectedly erupts around his hands. As Hank pushes himself up, his glowing purple hands make contact with his wooden table. Hank watches in shock as his solid wooden coffee table instantly melts into soft fabric. Hank touches the softened table and wonders how the glowing purple light transformed it. He stares closely at his glowing hand, trying to understand his strange new ability. Looking around, Hank notices that even his heavy metal toolbox has turned completely soft. Hank picks up a solid steel hammer from the floor to test his powers again. He squeezes the hammer and the hard metal bends around like soft rubber. Hank suddenly looks up and notices Mia quietly watching him from across the room. He freaks out in total panic after realizing Mia saw everything he just did. Mia quietly blinks through her glasses and continues staring directly at Hank. Mia opens her mouth and begins to speak directly to the stunned Hank. Mia suddenly stands up with glowing eyes, super excited by Hank's magic power. Hank covers his blushing face in total embarrassment while holding the soft hammer. Mia raises her hand to Hank and excitedly asks if she can stay at his apartment. She looks at Hank with big sparkling eyes and begs him to share his home. Mia sneaks inside the bedroom before Hank can even react or say no. Hank quickly slams the bedroom door shut to keep her inside. Hank sits back down on the floor and decides to leave Mia alone for now. He looks down at the bent metal tool and wonders how he changed it. Hank realizes that his mysterious purple power can soften solid metal objects. He closes his eyes to think about how to trigger his power again. Hank remembers that the purple light appeared right when he tripped over some cables. He thinks back to the sudden shock he felt as he fell toward the table. Recreating that feeling causes the bright purple aura to burst from his hands again. Hank smiles as he realizes he can activate his magic whenever he wants. Hank wonders if his new purple magic energy can also work on metal objects like cables. He picks up a heavy steel kitchen cleaver to test his theory. Bright purple light immediately swirls around the sharp metal blade. To his surprise, the hard steel cleaver turns soft and flexible under the purple glow. Hank squeezes the blade in disbelief, feeling it wobble around like soft jelly. He tests it on spoons, forks, and cups, leaving them completely melted and limp. Hank notices that the longer he applies purple light, the softer the object becomes. He sits at the table and ponders what else his powers can do. While playing with a soft piece of metal, a brilliant idea pops into his head. Hank wonders what will happen if he combines two different magical lights together. He channels both green and purple magic into the softened metal piece. Hank shouts out dramatically as a powerful aura of combined magic explodes from his hands. Hank combines his purple and green light together while holding a heavy cleaver. To his surprise, the blade becomes super hard and as reflective as a mirror. Hank realizes that combining both powers makes metal extremely strong instead of squishy. He tries with all his strength to bend the hardened piece, but it does not budge. Next, Hank places both glowing hands against his apartment wall to test his magic on concrete. He realizes he can turn his entire room into an indestructible shield. Hank gets excited knowing his home will now be safe from any outside danger. Suddenly, Hank senses movement and hears footsteps coming from the stairwell outside. Out in the dark hallway, two men walk downstairs carrying heavy bags of supplies. The two survivors whisper about hiding their food stash from the rest of the group. Suddenly, one of the men stops in his tracks and points in shock at the wall. They stare in complete shock as the solid concrete wall begins to strangely squirm and move. Outside in the stairwell, a survivor notices the wall on the 18th floor wriggling strangely. Suddenly, a creepy face bulges out from the stretching wall. The terrifying face emerges right in front of the stunned survivor. The man freezes in place, terrified by the creepy shadow pushing through the wall. The huge shape on the wall groans loudly, startling both survivors in the dark stairwell. Both men tremble in terror, believing they are staring at a terrifying ghost. The survivors scream in complete horror as the ghost-like face keeps groaning. Panicked, the two men turn around and race down the stairs to escape. Meanwhile, inside the room, Hank is caught in the squishy magic wall and struggles to breathe. Hank groans and pushes hard against the magic goo to free himself. Spreading his combined magic across the entire wall proves to be extremely exhausting for Hank. A bright burst of magic explodes around him as Hank forces his power to expand. Exhausted after reinforcing his house, Hank catches his breath amid the settling magic dust. Even though he is completely wiped out, Hank readies himself for another test. He reaches down toward a heavy sledgehammer resting on the floor. Hank lifts the heavy hammer, determined to test the strength of his new wall. Taking a deep breath, Hank focuses his energy to strike the magic barrier. Hank swings the heavy sledgehammer full force directly against the reinforced wall. Intense shock waves vibrate back into Hank's hands as the hammer hits. Hank is amazed to see that his powerful swing barely left a scratch. Meanwhile, down in the crowded underground parking shelter, survivors gather near the stairs. A weary survivor sets a small bag of scavenged food onto a table. He hands over his few supplies while another man writes down the count. Suddenly, someone firmly grabs the tired survivor by the shoulder from behind. A guard in a beanie pins a thief firmly to the freezing ground. The guard keeps him pinned while nearby bystanders silently watch the confrontation. He shouts at the thief for stealing extra bags of supplies from the camp. The thief grunts in pain, unable to break free from the guard's tight grip. The guard raises his fist, threatening to beat the thief until he tells the truth. Lee suddenly steps in and grabs the guard's arm to stop the violent punch. Lee calmly asks the guard to release the man so they can talk things out peacefully. Lee promises to handle the matter himself, and the guard agrees to stand down.
The guard lets go and shoves the thief onto the hard, icy floor. A gentle hand reaches out toward the groaning man lying on the ground. Lee offers a hand to help the beaten thief up, asking if he's all right. Behind his polite smile, Lee hides a sinister look as he plans his next move. 2 bags packed full of stolen food and supplies sit together on the floor. Everyone in the basement shelter watches as Lee manages the food distribution carefully. Lee hands a box of food to the thief, calling it his share for the day. He calmly explains that rules exist, but he still cares about everyone's personal struggles. Lee promises to help anyone in need as long as they follow his guidance. The trembling man tears up with relief and deeply thanks Lee for showing mercy. He holds the box of food tightly, feeling extremely grateful for the unexpected kindness. Lee picks up the remaining bags and warmly invites the man to reach out any time. Lee then addresses the crowd, telling everyone to collect their food and return home. The curious guards ask Lee how he persuaded the thief to surrender so easily. Lee smiles gently and replies that he simply taught the man a valuable lesson. He adjusts his glasses with a sinister look, pleased to have full control over the crowd.
Lee explained that crowds behave recklessly because individuals feel hidden within a larger group. He convinced the thief that nobody gets punished unless caught red-handed during a riot. Lee manipulated the desperate thief into leading the break-ins and taking all the risks. By staying hidden in the background, Lee controlled the group without risking his own safety. He threatened that anyone who broke his rules would be abandoned to face angry victims alone. The young twins watched silently, realizing how cold and calculating Lee truly was. Everyone in the room finally understood the dark strategy behind Lee's control over the neighborhood.
Uncle Luke quietly noted that every dangerous mob always has someone directing them behind the scenes. Confident in his control, Lee guided his loyal followers through the dark, frozen hallway. Meanwhile, Hank slammed a heavy sledgehammer with full force against his apartment structure. Exhausted and breathing heavily, Hank kept training hard to protect his home from potential threats. Hank wiped his sweat and gripped his hammer tight, ready for whatever danger arrived next. Hank stops swinging his sledgehammer when he hears a sudden knock on his front door. He quietly sneaks across the room, keeping his hammer ready in case of danger.
Hank reaches the door and sternly demands to know who is standing outside. Looking through the peephole, he sees Hannah begging him to open up and forgive her. Hank hears her exact same deceitful lines from his past life and instantly stays on guard. He realizes she is repeating her old tricks to lure him into opening the entrance. Hank knows that her dangerous partner is hiding right outside, waiting to attack him. In his past life, her armed boyfriend stood right behind her to strike him down. Fueled by past anger, Hank decides to use a far deadlier weapon against the treacherous pair. He heads over to the counter and grabs his powerful sniper rifle. Hank pauses for a brief second to carefully plan his next deadly move. Rifle in hand, Hank steps toward the entryway, ready to eliminate the intruders. Hank realizes using his shock trap on both intruders at once is nearly impossible. He turns off the generator and stays calm to analyze his next moves carefully. Hank knows Hannah is not the main threat, but her hidden boyfriend Kyle is. Gripping his heavy hammer, Hank prepares himself to deal with the ambush waiting outside. He must locate Kyle immediately and deliver a fatal blow as soon as he opens the door. Suddenly, Hank remembers a key detail about how the hallway outside is laid out. He realizes Kyle is hiding in a blind spot right next to the front door. Hank places his hand against the wall to prepare a new attack plan. Holding his weapon ready, Hank focuses his energy into the cold darkness. He knows channeling his superpower through the wall will take a moment. Purple magical energy begins glowing and flowing from his fingers straight into the wall. Hank smiles, realizing this surprise power tactic might give him the perfect quick victory. Chloe knocks on Hank's door, begging him to open up and let her inside.
Kyle asks if attacking Hank is worth the trouble, but Chloe reminds him of Hank's food. Kyle grins at the thought of stealing food while electric energy builds up behind him. Hank's deadly purple electricity creeps through the wall right behind the unsuspecting attacker. The electric power bursts through the wall, ready to strike Kyle from behind. Kyle pauses and asks Chloe if she hears a strange sound coming from the wall. Kyle turns around in confusion, trying to figure out where the noise is coming from. A massive blast of purple lightning suddenly strikes Kyle straight in the head.
The powerful electric shock sends Kyle flying backward into the hallway. Kyle crashes to the floor, twitching in pain, while Chloe gasps in sheer shock. Chloe backs away in terror and asks Kyle what happened as he lies groaning. Terrified and confused, Chloe hesitantly reaches out her hand toward Hank's cold door. Chloe freezes in utter horror as Hank gives her a smug, sinister glare. Overwhelmed by fear, Chloe feels the biting cold taking over her body. Swirling, freezing air blasts around Chloe as intense panic begins to consume her. Traumatic memories flood her mind, reminding her of a handsome royal turning into death. The dark, ghostly figure shrouded in black flames continues to haunt her thoughts. Chloe covers her ears and desperately cries out for the terrifying visions to stop. She shivers uncontrollably inside the freezing fog, unable to pull herself together. A sudden, painful cough cuts through the freezing mist and snaps her attention back. Chloe looks down and sees Kyle collapsed helplessly on the freezing floor. Kyle reaches out weakly from the ground, desperately pleading for someone to help him. Chloe gasps in disbelief, terrified as she watches Kyle suffer in pain. Suddenly, a mysterious hand reaches out from the dense fog straight toward Chloe.
Cole weakly holds up his hand, begging Hank to stop and hold on. Terrified on the ground, Cole tries to shield himself from Hank's relentless rage. Hank ignores his pleas and violently punches Cole repeatedly in the face. Hank pins Cole down and pummels him, screaming in rage about why Cole tried to kill him. Panting with bloody knuckles, Hank pauses for a second and demands that Cole speak up. Cole lies beaten and bloodied on the icy ground, groaning weakly in pain. Hank picks up his bat, determined to get answers one way or another. Cole coughs up blood as Hank stands coldly over his broken body.
Hank rests the heavy bat right against Cole's leg to threaten him further. Crying in agony, Cole weakly stammers out a confused question about what reason Hank wants. Hank grits his teeth in pure fury, disgusted by Cole's clueless response. Yelling at Cole not to play dumb, Hank viciously swings the bat straight down. Hank swings his spiked bat down with full force onto Cole. Blood splatters across the floor from the brutal strike. Hank shouts at Cole, asking if he showed any mercy when trying to kill him. Hank stops to catch his breath, panting heavily from exhaustion. He stares ahead with wide eyes, overwhelmed by his intense rage. Hank suddenly feels sick to his stomach and wipes his mouth. He drops to his knees and vomits while Cole lies unconscious. Suddenly, a throat clears behind him in the dark hallway. Hank gasps and quickly turns around in complete shock. Mia is sitting quietly against the wall watching the entire scene. Mia casually asks Hank if he needs any help. She looks at him calmly, completely unfazed by the bloody mess. Hank notices that Mia is not scared at all by the violent fight, finding her calm reaction strange. Hank warns Mia that the thugs could return for revenge, and she might get caught in danger. Mia simply sips her juice and barely gives him any reaction at all. Hank points his finger and insists he is telling her to leave for her own safety. Mia looks right back at him and plainly refuses to leave. Hank grows frustrated that she is not taking his serious warnings seriously. Mia puts her drink down on the table with a quick thud. She stands up and weirdly claims her mysterious inner powers will protect him. Mia turns to walk away, leaving Hank completely bewildered by her strange behavior. Hank reaches out and firmly grabs her coat sleeve to stop her. Hank angrily tells her to stop talking nonsense and take this dangerous situation seriously. Mia starts trembling silently as Hank holds onto her arm. Mia looks confused as Hank grabs her arm and demands an explanation. Hank tells her to keep talking while he reaches for the door handle. He quickly turns the handle to open the front door. Hank peers out into the hallway and asks if anyone is out there. He checks the corridor to see if anyone was listening in on them. Hank freezes in shock, suspecting someone was indeed eavesdropping outside his door. Meanwhile, down in the underground parking lot, announcements guide residents for food distribution. A huge crowd of shivering residents gathers around the emergency supply tables. Hannah waits patiently in line while bundled up in her thick pink jacket. She steps up to the desk and receives her daily food ration from the workers. As Hannah walks away, the workers realize someone already claimed rations for her apartment. She tightly holds her food, suspecting Hank was the imposter who took her apartment's supplies. Hannah remembers seeing warm light coming from under Hank's apartment door. She realizes Hank must have a secret power source keeping his home warm. She boils with anger, thinking about how Hank is enjoying all the heat. Hannah fumes that Hank hoarded the best supplies and only gave her trash. She vows to find a way inside Hank's apartment to see his setup. While walking through the cold garage, a voice suddenly calls out to her. Hannah shivers in the freezing air as a sketchy man approaches her. Todd shines a flashlight at her and invites her to his warm lobby. Hannah refuses his invitation and says she is heading back to her apartment. Todd grabs her arm tightly and tries to tempt her with extra food. He leans in close and tells her that she is completely his type.
Disgusted by his creepy offer, Hannah angrily slaps his hand away. Todd grabs Hannah's wrist tightly and angrily accuses her of being shameless. He shines a flashlight on her food, trying to act like he controls the building. Hannah gets nervous as the nearby crowd begins watching and gossiping about her. Unable to take it anymore, Hannah punches Todd right in the face to escape. Todd takes a hard blow to the cheek, his eyes wide in total shock. Furious, Todd raises his flashlight to strike Hannah down in retaliation. Before Todd can hit her, a fast shadow rushes in to interfere. Mia steps in unexpectedly and slaps Todd across the face with incredible force. The sudden hit sends Todd flying backward through the air, completely helpless. The surrounding crowd stares in disbelief at the sudden violent fight. Todd groans on the icy ground, completely defeated and out of breath. Mia offers Hannah medical help with a smile, but Hannah politely waves her off.
A sweet nurse named Jenny displays her price sign to offer medical help to people. A sick person wearing a warm coat approaches Jenny to ask about medical treatment. Suddenly, an angry man in a blue jacket aggressively grabs Jenny by her collar. The aggressive attacker tackles Jenny to the cold floor and yells at the surrounding crowd. As the attacker pulls back his fist to hit her, a defender rushes in. Hank punches the violent attacker hard across the jaw before he can strike Jenny. Hank slams the man onto the ground with an explosive throw. He stomps down hard on the attacker to ensure he stays down.
Hank takes a calm puff from his cigarette as the fight ends. Hank stands over the defeated man, telling the crowd he despises men who hurt women. Chaos breaks out in the area as people in the crowd begin shouting loud accusations. The bruised attacker points accusingly at a woman while a man in glasses listens closely. Hank angrily steps towards the loud troublemaker who caused the commotion. Hank moves quickly to confront the man before another fight erupts. Suddenly, Derek grabs the troublemaker by the collar and halts him. The scared man quickly apologizes to Derek for causing such a mess. Derek sternly warns the man while walking back toward the crowd. Derek approaches Hank and Jenny to settle the remaining tension peacefully. He politely asks everyone to keep the peace and avoid future conflict. Hank loses interest and casually walks away with a cigarette in his mouth. Jenny warmly offers to help treat any sick people in Derek's group. Derek thanks Jenny for her kindness as Hank walks further away. Nora turns to Derek and asks if she can join his team. She leans close to Derek, desperately hoping he will accept her. Nora clings closely to Derek's arm while trying to persuade him to take her along. Derek looks down at Nora coldly and asks if she is confusing her situation. Derek shoves Nora away, telling her that she brings no real value to his group. Nora panics as she realizes Derek is completely serious about leaving her behind. Derek pauses in interest when Nora claims she knows a location filled with useful resources. Meanwhile, inside the warm shelter, Hank stands near the fireplace surrounded by supply boxes. Chloe reaches her hand deep inside her glowing blue magic portal to search for supplies. Hank gets excited when Chloe reaches inside her portal and pulls out a random item. Hank yells in frustration when Chloe suddenly pulls out a full-sized mannequin instead. Hank lets out an exhausted sigh as Chloe keeps fetching random useless objects. Hank complains that his living room is becoming completely cluttered with all her junk. Hank wonders out loud how Chloe's strange portal dimension actually stores and pulls items. Hank asks Chloe if he can stick his head inside her portal to help search, and she agrees. Hank cautiously leans forward toward the glowing blue sphere floating in Chloe's hands. Hank pushes his head directly into the portal orb to see what is hidden inside. His vision blurs for a moment as his head passes through the boundary of the dimension. Hank enters the portal space, eager to see how much room Chloe actually has. Hank opens his eyes and finds himself staring into a bright, glowing blue realm. He looks around in total shock at the giant, endless world inside the small portal. Hank is amazed to see millions of boxes and supplies floating around the huge void. Countless items like food, furniture, and notebooks drift endlessly through the cosmic storage space. Hank suddenly realizes Chloe must be the legendary thief who looted all the massive supermarkets. Tears well up in Hank's eyes as the crazy truth finally sinks into his mind. Hank clutches his chest in disbelief, utterly overwhelmed by the massive hoard of stolen treasure. Hank struggles and strains hard to pull his head back out of the glowing blue portal. Hank finally yanks his head free from the portal and gasps heavily for air. Hank drops to his knees, coughing uncontrollably as tears run down his face. Hank remains on the floor, coughing violently while trying to catch his breath. Hank yells that the magical dimension felt like it was sucking all the moisture out of him. Hank looks at Chloe in disbelief, asking how she can stand using such a dangerous power. Chloe stays silent and calmly tilts her head while listening to Hank complain. Chloe reaches into her glowing portal and pulls out a massive heavy supply box. Hank flinches in surprise as Chloe suddenly dumps the giant box right in front of him. Dozens of heavy supply boxes fall out of the portal and pile up all around Hank. Hank looks completely stunned as he spots something on the screen. 3 intruders quietly creep up a dark, frozen staircase inside the building. They shine a flashlight on the wall, showing they have reached the 18th floor. The men continue stepping carefully up the icy steps in total darkness. Shivering from the freezing cold, 2 of the scouts grip their crowbars tightly. They keep climbing higher, trying not to make any loud noises. The guy with glasses reminds his group that their boss trusted them to scout first. He encourages his teammates, insisting they cannot let their group down. The 3 men push further up the stairs toward Hank's safe house. Unbeknownst to them, Chloe is monitoring their movements live on a drone controller. Hank stands beside Chloe, watching the intruders approach on the screen. Hank tells Chloe he will light the fires before she launches their trap. Hank checks his timer while Chloe prepares to operate her controls. The timer is set to count down 2 minutes for their surprise attack. Creeping up the dark stairs, the nervous intruders suddenly hear strange noises. The invaders stop on the steps, wondering what is coming from above. Bright lights suddenly shine down from the top of the dark stairwell. A fleet of remote-controlled toy cars comes speeding down the staircase. The intruders stare in shock as the toy cars charge right at them. One toy truck leaps through the air, carrying sticks of lit dynamite. The burning fuses on the dynamite rapidly reach the explosive charge. A massive explosion detonates in the stairwell, blowing the invaders away. Thick red dust fills the stairwell, blinding and confusing the attackers. Suddenly, a drone carrying a lit explosive hovers directly above the shocked men. The explosive fuse burns down quickly as the drone prepares to attack. The drone maneuvers through the heavy smoke right toward the invading group. It flies in close, using its camera lights to target the intruders. Mia hesitates for a moment and asks if she should drop it now. Leo shouts urgently through the screen, ordering her to attack immediately. He tells her to get closer and teach these intruders a serious lesson. Through the drone camera, Todd is seen charging up the stairs with a crowbar. Leo nervously yells out, warning her not to let Todd destroy their drone. Todd swings his crowbar wildly in an attempt to smash the approaching drone. A loud crack echoes through the stairwell as a heavy blow lands. Todd hits the drone with his crowbar, breaking one of its spinning propellers. Mia warns that the left side is damaged and the bomb timer has 5 seconds left. The broken drone loses control and wobbles violently through the hallway. It veers wildly down the staircase, escaping out of the defender's reach. Leo panics and yells at Mia to steer it back before it explodes. With 3 seconds remaining, the failing drone flies out into the freezing snowstorm. The timer reaches 1 second as Leo screams for her to regain control. The dark sky remains quiet for a brief moment as snow drifts between the buildings. Suddenly, the explosive detonates safely outside, filling the night sky with brilliant fireworks. Colorful sparks light up the freezing storm high above the ruined city towers. Meanwhile, another drone pushes through the heavy blizzard outside the building. Mia notices its right propeller is failing and warns that this drone is crashing too. Mia announces that their crashing drone managed to land safely on a window ledge outside a lower floor. Leo grabs his heavy winter coat as they prepare to figure out their next move. The drone camera feed glitches slightly as it streams video footage from the hallway below. Mia and Leo lean in closely together to inspect the video feed on the screen. The camera reveals a man lying collapsed and motionless on the freezing icy floor outside. Leo realizes the unconscious man on the video screen is actually one of their neighbors. Leo asks Mia why their neighbor would be lying passed out in such a dangerous spot. He begins to sweat, worrying that the neighbor was ambushed and robbed by ruthless scavengers. Leo decides to go retrieve the drone himself, warning Mia to keep the apartment door locked. Before heading out into the cold corridor, Leo opens a storage cabinet near his drinks. He rummages through his stored supplies to grab a weapon before stepping into the hallway. However, Leo suddenly freezes in surprise as he notices something completely unexpected inside the cabinet. Mia looks at Leo in confusion as he prepares his equipment. Mia hands Leo a walkie-talkie so they can stay in contact. Leo takes the walkie-talkie from Mia and thanks her for the help. Leo checks his handgun, hoping he won't need to use it. Leo walks down the dark, icy stairwell holding a flashlight. Mia checks the drone feed and tells Leo the upper floors are safe. Mia confirms over the radio that the 15th floor is clear too. Leo shivers as the freezing cold air hits him in the hallway. A terrible blizzard rages outside as Leo hurries to rescue Lee. An old neighbor warns someone to be careful going upstairs. Down below, freezing residents gather around a candle to write their names. The neighbors thank the building leader for keeping track of everyone. Lee hands out warm winter gloves to reward the helpful neighbors.
Lee promises the crowd that everyone who helps will be rewarded fairly. Lee instructs the group to pack up and get ready to move. Lee calmly explains the upcoming plan to an anxious Hannah. Hannah gasps as she realizes the danger of their mission. Zach hands Hannah a heavy metal pipe to protect herself. Hannah grips the pipe tightly and nervously agrees to follow along. Lee reminds the armed group to stay safe and alert. Hannah joins the armed neighbors as they prepare to climb. Heavy footsteps echo as the team begins heading up the stairs. Lee leads the large armed crowd up the dark stairwell.
Hannah and Lee discover a frozen man lying unconscious on the dark stairwell steps. The blonde man lies completely helpless on the freezing cold concrete floor. Hannah quickly pours hot water from her red thermos into his open mouth. The man suddenly opens his eyes wide as the burning liquid hits his throat. He jumps back in shock and yells out from the sudden burning heat. Cole stands up angrily and glares at Hannah for burning his mouth with hot water. Hannah argues back while Cole wipes his wet chin in utter annoyance. Cole wipes his face clean and scoffs bitterly at their unhelpful rescue attempt. Cole aggressively leans forward and points his finger right at Lee and Hannah. Hannah gets furious at Cole for insulting them after they just saved his life. Lee steps in calmly to explain their plan while Cole continues his loud complaining. Lee and his group confront Cole on the stairs, yelling at him for refusing to help. Cole steps forward angrily, refusing to yield to their aggressive demands. Lee calmly places a hand on Cole's shoulder and asks if there is a misunderstanding. Lee explains politely that everyone needs to work together to protect the weaker survivors. Cole shouts back that giving the weak barely any food is no different from letting them die.
Cole points directly at Lee's chest, angrily exposing the harsh reality of their rule. Zach hides quietly on the upper stairs, secretly watching the heated argument below. Tension fills the icy stairwell as the confrontational debate continues to escalate. Zach watches anxiously from the shadows, worried about where this fight is heading. Zach realizes the committee is using the weak people as an excuse to exert total control. Losing his patience, an aggressive group member grabs Cole by the collar and threatens him. Cole tightly clenches his fist, ready to strike if the conflict turns violent.
Hank suddenly headbutts Kyle hard in the face, sending him reeling back in pain. Kyle slumps to the ground, clutching his face, while Hank stands tall and taunts the crowd. The armed mob surrounds Hank, but he grabs a weapon and refuses to back down. The man with glasses sighs quietly as the situation escalates into violence. He turns his back and walks away, leaving Hank alone against the hostile crowd. The armed men slowly close in on Hank near the frozen staircase. Hank raises his fists, furiously daring the mob to attack him all at once. Watching from above, Leo gets worried and desperately wants to rush down and help Hank. Leo hesitates on the stairs, realizing there is nothing he can do to stop them. He looks down in sorrow, knowing Hank is completely outnumbered. Leo clenches his fist in frustration as he watches Hank throw away his life. Someone moves quickly to step into the dangerous situation on the cold stairs. Leo steps down holding a handgun, determined to save Hank from the mob. Hank sways weakly on the stairs while the angry crowd continues pressing forward. One of the attackers looks up in shock as a loud sound interrupts them. A sudden gunshot blasts through the dark, icy hallway. The warning shot ricochets loudly off the hard floor near the attackers. The lead thug falls back in terror as smoke rises from the bullet hole. The entire mob panics when they realize someone actually fired a real gun. Leo shouts furiously at the crowd, ordering them to back away immediately. He aims his weapon straight at the crowd while shining a flashlight on them. Hank watches in shock as Leo stands guard beside him and holds off the mob. Hank stares in shock as Leo holds the weapon ready to fire. The angry mob stands completely frozen, terrified by the deadly gun. Hannah watches silently as Leo keeps his firearm aimed at the crowd. Leo whispers to Hank, telling him to start backing away slowly. Hank nods nervously and begins to retreat behind Leo's protection. Sensing a brief distraction, a few mob members try to step forward. Leo instantly fires another warning shot right near their feet. He shouts firmly, warning the crowd not to make a single move. Leo demands that the intruders drop their weapons and kneel down. He tells Hank to go upstairs, threatening to shoot anyone who follows. Leo and Hank make their escape up the frozen stairwell safely. The terrified mob stays pinned on the landing below, unable to follow. Victor watches in utter shock after seeing Leo pull out a real gun. The mob remains frozen on the floor while watching Leo walk away safely. Nora reveals to the shocked crowd that the gunman was actually Leo. Kyle grabs Nora in disbelief, asking if she really saw a gun. Nora turns to Victor to ask if Leo was telling the truth. Victor calms the group down and tells them to think carefully. Victor reasons that Leo would have killed them already if he wanted to. The surrounding neighbors agree with Victor and begin shouting among themselves.
Kyle asks Victor what they should do about their original break-in plan. Victor smiles slyly, stating Leo cannot stay locked inside his home forever. A security camera quietly monitors the icy entrance outside apartment 1804. Todd nervously points his gun while Lee gets ready to unlock the heavy door. Both men shiver uncontrollably in the freezing cold while standing outside the door. Lee carefully inserts the key into the lock with his trembling gloved hand. A wave of warm steam blasts out as the door finally swings open. Todd urges Lee to get inside quickly before the freezing air rushes in.
They are stunned to find a giant working heater warming up the place. A large red generator sits nearby, providing full power to the shelter. Lee presses his hands against the glass, amazed by all the saved supplies. The men stand in total awe of the comfortable living conditions inside. Lee asks how it is even possible to have such a cozy house now. Mia peeks out from a doorway and asks where the drone went. Todd freezes in panic, realizing he completely forgot to bring the drone inside. Kyle gets confused when Mia asks about the drone they forgot outside. Leo stands quietly as Kyle panics over leaving their valuable drone behind. Kyle stuffs his mouth full of food while listening carefully to Leo. The group sits together around the dining table, enjoying a delicious warm meal. Leo smiles awkwardly while Kyle stares in disbelief with his mouth completely stuffed. Kyle sets his chopsticks down on the wooden table after finishing his food. Kyle bows deeply to express his deep gratitude to Leo for saving his life. Leo looks surprised as Kyle suddenly becomes overwhelmed with intense emotion. Kyle cries tears of joy and grabs Leo's shoulder to thank him profusely. Leo warmly reassures Kyle, while Mia quietly sits nearby drinking her beverage. The three of them sit at the dining table to rest and drink juice. Kyle holds his juice box and questions Leo about how he stocked everything. Kyle explains how angry groups armed with bats began taking over the cold streets. A quiet observer watched from afar, choosing not to get involved in the violence. These cruel gangs viciously attacked defenseless people to eliminate any potential threats. Kyle points out two aggressive twin brothers, Seth and Sam, who led the violence. Leo listens carefully as Kyle warns him about the dangerous people roaming nearby. Kyle mentions how these bullies tried to rob anyone who refused to follow them. He explains that surviving became almost impossible without joining a strong group. Kyle gets intense as he talks about the strongest fighter in the entire zone. A powerful man named Duke stepped in to brutally clear out rival thugs. Duke slammed a rival thug directly into the icy ground with one punch. Back at the table, Kyle continues telling Leo about the district's power struggles. The defeated survivors were forced to retreat, leaving Duke's faction in control. Lee brutally beats down anyone who stands in his way during the chaos. Lee's faction has two infamous fighters backing him up in the building. One of his top men easily took down an entire group single-handedly. Another follower is a lightning-fast underground fighter known for his deadly speed. He drags defeated victims around without showing a single shred of mercy. A third heavy hitter possesses monster-like strength and easily crushes his opponents. Together, Lee's faction has become a dominant and dangerous force in the neighborhood. Todd warns Zach and Mia that Lee's group plans to steal their supplies. Zach realizes the other factions in the building are rapidly falling apart. Suddenly, a loud noise echoes from outside near the front door. Mia checks the camera feed and warns them that intruders have arrived. A heavily armed mob gathers at the entrance, preparing to breach the apartment. Todd screams in terror, warning Zach that the thugs are already right at the door. Mia calmly looks at her screen while Todd and Zach watch in shock. Suddenly, a loud blast rocks the apartment, knocking everyone off their feet. Zach and Todd crash onto the floor as dust and debris fill the air. Zach covers his ears, shouting in shock that the attackers are throwing bombs at them.
Mia reassures them that the crude explosives are too weak to break their custom door. The security feed shows the mob outside holding homemade bombs and tactical shields. Two gang members outside whisper to each other, confused that their bomb failed. The attackers signal to each other, deciding to force their way inside manually. Zach rushes over to a generator and plugs in a heavy-duty electric cable. Zach flips the power switch, sending thousands of volts directly into the metal door. Outside, an attacker touches the electrified door handle and gets violently shocked, falling unconscious. The thugs gather around their shocked comrade lying unconscious on the cold ground.
Victor hands out more explosives, refusing to give up his attack on the apartment. They attach 2 large bomb packs directly onto the heavy metal door. Another powerful blast erupts in the hallway with a huge flash of fire. Smoke and debris scatter everywhere, shaking the entire hallway. When the smoke clears, the attackers are shocked to see the door still standing. Victor steps out from behind his shield to inspect the undamaged door. He pauses and thinks carefully about how to penetrate the strong barrier. Victor tells his crew to combine all their remaining bombs on one single spot. He vows to break inside and take down the apartment today no matter what. Inside, Zach and Cole catch their breath on the floor behind their barricade. The loud explosion shakes the room, forcing Zach and Todd to cover their ringing ears. Todd yells at Zach because he cannot hear anything after the massive blast. Zach suddenly hears strange cracking sounds coming from the wall behind them. Cracks begin spreading rapidly across the wall from the heavy explosive pressure. Todd sees the wall cracking and panics that their defense is about to fail. Todd tries to find more heavy items to block the breaking entrance.
Zach knows that adding more furniture will not stop the wall from breaking. While they struggle to move heavy objects, Mia steps up to help them. Todd tells Mia to hide, but she creates a glowing blue magic orb instead. Todd screams in total shock as he stares at the magic orb Mia summoned. Mia calmly holds her spatial magic while Todd backs away in complete disbelief. Mia uses her spatial magic to instantly absorb and clear away the heavy furniture. All the heavy furniture and boxes get sucked directly into Mia's magical dimensional portal. Mia calmly holds her magic orb and announces that the entire room is finally clear.
Todd cowers on the floor, terrified by how powerful and scary Mia's magic is. Todd shouts in surprise as Zach steps up and begins channeling glowing purple energy. Zach reaches his hand toward the cracked wall to prepare his magic technique. He presses his hands on the wall, carefully controlling his energy to reshape it. Zach blends green and purple energy together to quickly fortify the damaged doorway. Glowing green magical particles spread across the door, solidifying its broken surface. Zach looks on with satisfaction as the door turns into a solid, reinforced shield. Zach catches his breath after spending so much effort strengthening the entire wall. Suddenly, Todd screams in terror and tells everyone to duck for cover. Another violent explosion strikes the door, causing fresh cracks to form once again. Zach turns around in shock as he suddenly realizes what the attackers are actually doing. Mia looks up in surprise, realizing the true danger they are facing. An explosive device sits by the door, set to blow up the floor beneath them. Zach realizes that reinforcing the door is useless if the floor collapses under their feet. Zach steps forward and asks Mia and Cole if they are willing to trust his plan. Mia nods without hesitation, showing total trust in Zach's judgment. Cole agrees right away, urging Zach to tell them what they need to do. With his team ready to follow him, Zach prepares to put his idea into action. A brief vision flashes, showing a mysterious horned elf prince and dark skeletal monsters. Massive explosive blasts echo loudly as the attack hits the hallway. Debris flies everywhere outside as the force of the bombs shakes the building. The structure buckles and the floor begins to give way under the intense pressure. The blast destroys the floor, creating a large hole straight into the apartment below. The greedy intruders look down through the opening, eager to steal any food they find. Believing the path is clear, the gang members prepare to climb down one by one. Carrying wooden shields, the men enter the room cautiously to search for useful supplies. They search the living space and kitchen but grow frustrated when they find no food. One gang member grabs a cardboard box only to realize it is completely empty inside. The intruders gather near the back doorway, suspecting someone might still be hiding nearby. Mia tries to act frightened and confused to buy time and distract the attackers. Two gang members approach a closed door, cautiously checking if anyone is waiting inside. As one man opens the door, he gasps in shock at what is waiting behind it. Cole kicks the heavy door directly into the man's face, knocking him backward hard. Cole stands ready for battle, while Zach steps up from behind with his gun aimed. Hank aims his gun as the neighbors shout a sudden warning. The mob advances with heavy shields, but Hank holds his ground. Hank's ally blocks the doorway while Hank warns the intruders to back off. The scheming leader tries to manipulate the crowd into attacking Hank. The angry neighbors corner Hank and his ally in the tight hallway. The mob shout together, demanding that Hank give up his supplies. Hank holds his pistol steady and refuses to negotiate with the crowd. The starving neighbors grow desperate and press closer behind their shields. Hank angrily screams back that he does not have any food left. An intruder claims Hank had plenty of light and heat earlier. Mia yells loudly, accusing Hank of hiding his rich food stash. Hank fires a bullet right past Mia, shattering the glass beside her. Hank aims his gun through the shattered glass, warning the crowd to stay away. Hank angrily shouts that he would not be suffering if he actually had extra supplies. He yells at everyone in frustration, refusing to let them push him around anymore. Suspicious neighbors turn to Mia, asking if she lied to them about Hank's hidden stash. Victor steps forward and proposes sending two people inside to search Hank's room directly. Victor points at two scared men, ordering them to enter and search the apartment. Hank keeps his gun drawn, coldly allowing them to look around for themselves. The men enter and find only empty trash and Hank's terrified young sister, Hannah. Hannah clings to Hank, crying from hunger, while Hank promises to protect and feed her. Outraged by the empty room, the crowd turns on Mia for making them waste their effort. Victor approaches anxious Mia, telling her that she needs to account for her lie. The angry mob corners Mia, loudly demanding an explanation for bringing them here. The furious mob corners Mia, demanding an immediate explanation under threat of violence. Mia panics in shock, unable to understand where all the hidden food vanished. She glares at Hank, realizing he must have pulled a trick to frame her. Driven desperate, Mia reaches into her pocket and turns on her flashlight. Mia rushes past the neighbors, shining her flashlight directly into Hank's apartment. Hank flinches in surprise as the bright light suddenly flashes right at him. Mia draws her handgun, ready to force Hank to reveal the truth. The surrounding neighbors shout in shock as Mia aims her gun directly at Hank. The crowd watches nervously, horrified that Mia has pulled out a lethal weapon. Hank remains composed under pressure, coolly asking what truth she wants to hear. Mia holds Hank at gunpoint while he pretends to be helpless and terrified. Screaming hysterically, Mia accuses Hank of lying to everyone about the missing supplies. Mia completely loses her mind and hysterically threatens to kill Hank on the spot. Before she can pull the trigger, someone knocks the gun out of her hand with a pipe. The angry crowd restrains Mia as she desperately screams that she is telling the truth. Hank and Hannah watch closely as the dropped weapon lands round the floor. Hank immediately bends down to snatch up the fallen handgun from the ground. Victor steps directly in front of Hank to take control of the situation. Victor secures the weapon himself before Hank can make a move. Hank and Victor exchange a quiet, tense look with each other. The mob turns on Mia, furiously calling her out for lying about the food. An angry neighbor grabs Mia by her hair and prepares to strike her. Victor catches the attacker's arm, warning the crowd not to resort to violence. Victor steps in front of the angry crowd to protect Mia from being beaten. He tells the mob that violence is not the answer, even if Mia lied to them. Victor apologizes to Hank on Mia's behalf and asks him to give her another chance. He then turns around and hands the gun back over to Hank. Hank looks completely surprised as Victor hands him the weapon. Hank takes the gun back into his hand without saying a word. Victor then surprisingly invites Hank to join their building's leadership committee. Victor smiles smoothly and says they could really use someone strong like Hank. He tells Hank that he does not need to make a decision right away. Victor leads the crowd away, leaving Hank standing in the hallway to think.
Hank and Hannah are left standing alone together in the empty corridor. Once Victor leaves, Kyle rushes over to check on Hank, who looks totally exhausted. Hank finally breathes a huge sigh of relief now that the dangerous confrontation is over. He flops onto his comfortable couch and relaxes in the warmth of his home. Hank enjoys his cozy apartment with Kyle and Mia while multiple electric heaters warm the room. The powerful heaters keep their spacious apartment nice and warm despite the freezing cold outside. Hank smiles as he explains how well their little trick worked on Victor and the mob.
He recalls telling Mia to store all their furniture and food inside her secret space. Hank had also ordered Kyle to open all the windows to freeze the apartment quickly. His goal was to make the apartment look completely abandoned and cleared out of food. While eating a warm meal, Hank explains that the disappointed mob will soon turn against Victor. He knows that when desperate people find nothing, they will start blaming and attacking each other. Hank explains that Victor wanted to use the gun to force Uncle Luke into taking the blame. Kyle reacts in shock as he realizes Hank let Victor take his gun on purpose.
Hank warns that Uncle Luke will try to fix the situation to protect his public image. Hank carefully considers how Uncle Luke will react once he learns the truth. Hank points out that everything is playing out exactly according to his plan. Kyle loudly praises Hank for outsmarting Victor so easily. Kyle gives Hank an enthusiastic thumbs up for his brilliant strategy. Hank, Kyle, and Mia enjoy a hot meal while discussing their next mission. Meanwhile, Uncle Luke leads a gang of men down the hallway. The scene shifts to the ice-covered underground parking garage. Grateful neighbors gather as Uncle Luke distributes food supplies to everyone. Two sneaky figures watch secretly from the shadows near a parked car. In the dark basement, a big crowd lines up to receive their daily food rations. A man at a wooden table oversees the heavy boxes of packed food supplies. Two guards carry a heavy supply box through the dimly lit hallway. Meanwhile, Cole and Zach crouch in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to move. Cole whispers his plan to Zach and gives a quick nod to head upstairs. They review the building layout to figure out where the enemy keeps their main supplies. Cole reminds Zach to use their metal pipes quietly so they do not alert anyone. Holding their metal pipes, the two men cautiously creep up the frozen staircase. They pass the 6th floor landing and whisper to each other to stay silent. Standing outside the 7th floor, Zach wonders if the supplies are actually stored inside. Cole peeks around the wall and is surprised to see no guards anywhere nearby. Since the floor is completely empty, they agree to split up and search both sides. Cole shines his flashlight into the quiet hallway, wondering why there are no guards protecting the upper floor. He remembers discussing a plan with his teammates to defeat the enemy committee from the inside. During their meeting, Zach asked how just 3 people could possibly take down such a large group. Cole explained that the enemy relies on food supplies, so taking their stash will crush them. Back in the present, Cole searches for the supply room while staying alert for potential enemies. Suddenly, Cole spots Zach wildly celebrating down the hall after finding a door marked warehouse. Cole is completely stunned that the enemy made the storage room so easy to find. Standing outside the door, Cole warns Zach that having an obvious sign seems like a clear trap. Cole gets even more suspicious when he notices the key was conveniently left sitting in the keyhole. Ignoring Cole's warnings, Zach reaches out toward the door handle to open it anyway. Cole quickly grabs Zach and shouts at him to stop before he makes a terrible mistake. Cole points out thin tripwires wrapped around the lock that would detonate explosives if turned. Zach realizes the enemy men were talking about setting the explosive trap on the door. Cole tells Zach to stay quiet and calm so they can figure out a plan. They back away from the rigged door to discuss how to open it safely. Suddenly, 2 enemy guards step out from a nearby door into the hallway. The guards immediately spot Cole and Zach standing right in front of them. Both sides freeze for a quick moment before preparing to fight. Cole charges forward immediately to strike the guards before they can react. Cole slides across the dark floor straight toward the enemy group. Cole and Zach rush into the dark room with their weapons raised. An enemy guard swings a pipe at Cole, making Zach shout out a warning. Cole blocks the guard's heavy attack with his metal bar just in time. Zach jumps in to defend Cole as another enemy tries to strike him. Cole kicks the enemy guard hard to knock him down and clear their path. Suddenly, a heavy door slams violently shut right behind them in the dark hallway. A thick metal bar drops down, firmly locking Cole and Zach inside the stairwell. Cole frantically pushes on the locked door while looking for another way out. They suddenly hear heavy footsteps echoing down from the stairs above them. Desperate to avoid the incoming guards, they quickly decide to run up the stairwell. They rush all the way up the icy stairs until they reach the 8th floor. Cole checks on Zach and notices him clutching his injured right arm in pain. Zach admits his arm might be fractured, while Cole suddenly freezes in shock. Cole's face turns pale as he points frantically behind Zach in pure horror. Zach turns his head around nervously to see what is lurking right behind him. A giant hand reaches out from the darkness and tightly grabs Zach's face. A massive enemy grabs Zach and violently throws him backward through the doorway. Cole screams in terror from outside as he sees his brother get thrown. Zach flies through the open doorway, completely airborne from the heavy toss. He slams brutally onto the hard floor with a painful crash. The force of the throw sends him sliding heavily across the cold ground. Zach lies on the floor groaning, completely breathless from the hard hit. Cole desperately yells through the door, promising to break in and rescue him. A mysterious hooded man looms over Zach and coldly asks what they are doing. Zach nervously lies, claiming they only came inside to search for simple supplies. The dark figure stands over Zach while he writhes on the ground in pain. The older gray-haired leader reveals he knows they intentionally avoided specific enemy floors. Zach sweats in pure panic, realizing the dangerous enemy saw right through his lie. Zach stares in shock at a hooded stranger standing inside the ruined apartment. Zach is terrified after seeing all the enemy thugs lying unconscious on the floor. The whole floor is filled with beaten men, showing how dangerous this veteran really is. The hooded veteran stands over Zach and demands to know where his companion went. Zach sweats nervously, completely terrified by the overwhelming power standing right before him. Instead of finishing off Zach, the hooded man turns and walks toward the open balcony. Roy steps onto the freezing ledge and prepares to jump into the heavy snowstorm. Roy gives Zach a harsh choice: jump into the blizzard or stay inside and die. Loud banging suddenly echoes from the front door as more enemies try to break in. Zach looks at the empty window in absolute shock after seeing Roy jump out. The front door lock breaks with a loud snap as the angry mob forces it open. Zach hurriedly leaps out into the freezing blizzard just as the attackers burst inside. Both men slide down the side of the icy skyscraper at top speed. Zach uses his glowing purple magic to slow his drop down the frozen wall. Roy safely lands on a snow-covered ledge lower down the building. Roy turns around in surprise as Zach lands right next to him. Enemies at the top window spot them and shout down in shock. Zach looks up in panic, realizing they are completely exposed out in the open. Roy smashes through a glass window to quickly get back inside the building. Zach curses in frustration and hurries to follow Roy into the building. The two escape inside just in time as snow swirls around the skyscraper. The icy window sits shattered and empty as wind blows through the storm. Upstairs, armed thugs kick open the door to search the room. Finding the room completely empty, the angry attackers decide to search the lower floors. Leo and Kyle sit around a small fire to keep warm inside the dark room. Leo silently admits to himself that Kyle is actually very smart. Leo remembers how Kyle dragged him up the stairs to escape the enemies. Kyle had outsmarted their pursuers by predicting their traps and moving quickly. Kyle teasingly asks Leo if he was terrified during their narrow escape. Kyle reveals to Leo that the figure sitting beside them is just a dead body. Leo nervously stares at the frozen corpse sitting motionless near the warm fire. Leo asks Kyle why he went through the trouble of saving his life. Kyle tells Leo he needs useful information and demands he start talking. Kyle cracks his knuckles, threateningly telling Leo to share everything he knows. Leo realizes Kyle fought the guards to steal supplies or attack the enemy group. Leo worries that his sudden arrival ruined whatever plan Kyle originally had. Leo nervously asks Kyle why he holds a grudge against the committee. Kyle admits he has a deep personal grudge against the ruling group. Frustrated and scared, Leo yells and demands to know the real secret. Kyle only chuckles softly, refusing to give Leo a straight answer. Kyle stands up and looms over Leo with an intimidating aura. Kyle darkly mentions the committee and the power they hold. Sparks fly from the warm fire as Kyle pauses in silence. Kyle warns Leo to talk, or he will become another frozen corpse. Kyle turns around, leaving the deadly threat hanging in the air. Terrified for his life, Leo realizes he has no choice but to obey. Leo sits quietly by the fire, trembling in terror after the warning. Leo panics and shouts as he desperately tries to explain himself to Kyle. Kyle quickly places his handgun onto the table to prove his cooperation. Kyle stands over him coldly, completely unimpressed by the small pistol. Kyle explains that a weak handgun will not stop the committee leaders. Leo grows nervous, wondering why Kyle refuses to take the weapon. Kyle warns him that the committee holds much deadlier firepower in reserve. Leo listens quietly while Kyle continues detailing how dangerous the enemy is. Leo starts to realize why Kyle treats the committee as a threat. Flashbacks show Derek using large stockpiles of heavy weapons to control people. Kyle states that the committee relies entirely on Derek to stay united. Under Derek's rule, survivors are forced to surrender supplies for tiny rations. Anyone who disobeys Derek is brutally beaten and stripped of their belongings. Leo warns Kyle about the severe danger the committee poses to everyone. Kyle laughs off the warning and refuses to take part in Leo's plan. Kyle stands up and completely rejects Leo's dangerous proposal to fight. Kyle tells Leo that fighting back will only bring more violence and death. Kyle turns around when he suddenly hears someone standing outside the door. Kyle opens the door and sees a figure waiting outside in the dark. Suddenly, a heavy red bag comes flying through the open doorway. The flying bag strikes Kyle right in the head, taking him by surprise. Furious, Kyle swings a massive punch directly at the bold attacker. To Kyle's complete surprise, the hooded figure blocks his punch with one hand. The attacker grabs Kyle's fist tightly and easily squeezes his powerful hand. The intruder yanks Kyle forward and slams his heavy body to the ground. Hank suddenly stops his heavy punch right before hitting the startled girl. Chloe freezes in shock as the massive fist hovers near her face. Hank asks if she is the local nurse, shocking both her and Kyle. Chloe gasps in complete shock as she recognizes Hank. Chloe carefully wraps clean medical bandages around Kyle's injured arm. By the warm fire, Chloe explains how she found the dead man and hid. She describes her medical visit and how she got trapped inside. Hank listens quietly with a skeptical look on his face. Hank mocks her kindness, calling her selfless medical work a joke. Chloe firmly answers that she does not regret trying to help people. Chloe stands her ground bravely, leaving Hank completely silent. Chloe turns to Kyle with a warm smile after finishing his bandages. Chloe smiles warmly, touched by Hank's unexpected kindness and protection during such hard times. She reveals that the greedy leader of her old shelter threw out all the sick people. Hank grimly admits that in a frozen apocalypse, cutting off the weak is common survival logic. Kyle realizes that the tyrant's ruthless thugs have taken total control of the nearby neighborhood. They realize this violent faction is preparing to clash with rival survivors in the area. Hank points out that the enemy leader even used dangerous explosives to steal extra supplies. Chloe looks down nervously, fearing that a brutal war for food is about to begin. Hank warns that the hostile gang will attack the new shelter next, shocking poor Chloe. Hearing this, Kyle stands up despite his injured arm, refusing to just sit around helplessly. Hank asks what a single wounded man can possibly do against an entire armed gang. Kyle boldly replies that he will hit the armory and fight back rather than wait to freeze. Hank stares silently at Kyle, deeply impressed by the young man's fearless determination. Hank pulls up his hood while Kyle watches him carefully. Hank pulls back the curtain, warning that even deadlier conflicts are coming in this frozen apocalypse. Hank steps directly into the freezing blizzard, determined to survive on his own. Hank slams the door shut, leaving Kyle and Chloe standing alone inside. Kyle and Chloe remain in the quiet room beside the burning fire. Chloe looks up at Kyle and asks how she can help him in the fight. Chloe raises her fists, ready to show that she can be useful. Kyle smiles awkwardly and suggests that she should just stay close to him. Chloe gets flustered and yells at Kyle for treating her like a child. Chloe suddenly leans in close and stares directly into Kyle's eyes. Kyle freezes in surprise, completely stunned by her intense glare. Outside, the icy storm rages on as wind blows against the window. Armed thugs search the dark floor with flashlights while talking to each other. The men suddenly stop and turn as loud noises echo down the hallway. Roy lies tightly bound on the cold floor while struggling against his ropes. Heavy footsteps sound loudly down the long frozen corridor. The sound of someone running gets closer to the open room. Roy coughs violently while lying helpless on the freezing floor. A cruel thug shines a flashlight on Roy and kicks him hard in the back. The thug screams angrily at Roy for trying to slip away from them. Another guard bursts into the room to warn that something bad happened outside. The guards quickly rush out, leaving the dark doorway completely empty. Roy remains pinned to the floor,
tied up tightly with thick ropes. Roy listens quietly as the footsteps of the thugs fade down the hall. Roy uses his glowing green energy to secretly break free from his bindings. He lies bound on the floor, relieved that his plan to get inside worked. Healing his severe injuries takes a massive toll on his remaining energy. The energy snaps the heavy ropes around him, freeing his body entirely. Roy sits up, panting, realizing that healing himself uses too much stamina. Suddenly, a sound at the door catches Roy completely off guard.
The guards open the door and throw another bound captive onto the floor. The guards decide to leave the prisoner there while they consult their boss. Roy looks over nervously to see who else got caught by the guards. He gets a closer look and quickly recognizes the beaten victim as Lee. Lee touches his swollen face, completely numb from the violent beating he took. With the guards gone, Roy sits beside Lee to discuss their next move. Lee explains that after Roy was taken away, he hid inside the power room. Inside the dark room, Lee looked around using his small flashlight. He soon discovered a large opening in the floor leading deeper down. Thick power cables ran straight down into the pitch-black hole below. Lee grabbed the heavy cables and carefully climbed down to the lower level. He reached the second basement floor, which was completely empty of guards. Shining his flashlight, Lee noticed rows of tightly sealed boxes everywhere. Dozens of identical cardboard boxes were stacked across the entire basement floor. Lee opened a box and was shocked to see giant sausages inside. He looked closer at the massive food stash hidden in the dark room. Before Lee could react, a hidden guard quietly crept up behind him. Lee turned around in surprise right before the guard knocked him out cold. Lee throws his hands up, describing just how massive the mystery sausages in the basement were. Roy wonders why anyone would disguise dangerous explosives as ordinary food packages. Roy explains that the items had no labels, but their shape was completely identical to sausages. Suddenly, Roy realizes the dark truth behind the fake sausages and gasps in utter shock. Lee panics and frantically asks Roy what he thinks those mysterious objects really are. Their tense conversation is interrupted when they hear noises right outside the closed room door. Lee freaks out, convinced the dangerous people outside are coming inside to kill them. The metal door handle slowly turns as someone begins opening the entrance from the outside. Two armed guards carrying heavy weapons and flashlights step into the dark, icy room. Hiding quietly in the dark shadows, Lee and Roy wait to ambush the unsuspecting guards. Lee leaps out from behind the door to overpower one of the intruders instantly. Lee and Roy easily conquer the guards and tie them up back to back on the floor. Roy and Lee check their earpieces as an urgent message comes through over the radio. Roy listens closely to the comms, stunned by the unexpected news he receives. The two men pause in the cold hallway while listening to the intense radio update. Roy panics when he learns that Hannah is marching directly into a dangerous situation. He frantically tries to respond, but the radio signal suddenly cuts out to static. Roy and Lee carefully crack open the door to see if the hallway is clear. Suddenly, heavy crashing sounds echo through the corridor, making both men stop instantly. A panicked mob of survivors rushes toward the stairs, shouting about defending their food. The angry group carries cleavers and metal pipes to stop anyone from taking their supplies. Roy and Lee realize that Hank is already fighting his way through the building. They quickly cover their faces with hoods and masks to blend in with the mob. Roy and Lee blend in with the angry crowd pushing through the narrow hallway. Loud shouts echo across the passage as the armed mob moves aggressively forward. They follow the mob closely down the dark stairs to avoid drawing attention. Suddenly, a panicked resident stumbles and crashes violently down the icy steps. A man tightly grips a heavy metal pipe, ready to defend his supplies. Hank stands surrounded by the angry mob, holding a weapon and breathing heavily. Lee looks over in shock as he spots Hank standing alone in the crowd. Meanwhile, Mia carefully inspects a dark hallway, searching for any signs of life. She leans against a thick wooden door, listening closely for sounds inside. Mia turns around startled as a woman carrying a medical kit approaches her. The medic asks Mia if she is looking for someone inside the shelter. Mia remains cautious while the medic shines her flashlight toward the quiet doorway. Hannah pretends she was just searching the dark hallway to find some extra food. Nora looks surprised and questions if Hannah is really only looking for food. Nora suddenly hears noises and asks if there are other people lurking nearby. An angry mob armed with shovels steps out from the shadows behind Hannah. Hannah shines her flashlight on Nora as the frightened medic retreats down the hall. Hannah remembers seeing Lee give supplies to Nora and suspects she is hidden food. Hannah whispers sneaky instructions to her men while keeping her light on Nora. Two menacing men advance toward Nora while she tries to back away safely. The two thugs grab Nora from behind to trap her against the wall. Nora loses her patience and angrily decides to stop being polite to them.
The attackers gasp in total shock as Nora suddenly turns her strength against them. Nora effortlessly slams both thugs to the ground, stunning Hannah and her entire mob. Mia backs away nervously as Hannah and her armed group surround her at the door. Hannah secretly pulls out a sharp knife hidden inside her heavy coat. Hannah suddenly lunges forward and slashes Mia, cutting straight through her thick jacket. Hannah tells her men to stay alert as they push deeper into the hallway. Suddenly, a mysterious force shakes the corridor and pulls weapons right out of their hands. Leo appears, using a glowing dark ore power to disarm the entire mob at once. Leo quickly forms hand signs to focus his dark gravitational energy. A massive suction force swirls around Leo as his dark energy spear fully charges.
Hannah gasps in terror as the powerful wind drags her uncontrollably toward Leo. The wild force lifts the whole crowd off the ground and spins them through the air. The terrified attackers scream in total panic, convinced an evil ghost is attacking them. Leo takes advantage of the chaos and strikes one of the thugs with a hard blow. In the chaos, mask-wearing thugs beat each other down during the fierce brawl. Leo and his allies sprint across the dark garage floor to escape the pursuing gang. Leo and his companions scream in panic as the dangerous mob chases right behind them. Furious thugs charge forward rapidly through the parking structure to grab the duo. An enraged thug screams violently, swearing to kill Leo for hurting his crew. Leo smirks confidently, keeping his cool while the frantic chase unfolds around him. The panicked duo continues running while yelling out orders to avoid getting caught. Leo grits his teeth anxiously, quickly tantalizing his options to survive the trap. Leo tells his friend to escape alone and rendezvous at their backup location later. The mob sweeps through the garage corridor, searching relentlessly for the escaping target. A strong beam of flashlight light suddenly cuts through the dark parking garage.
Leo climbs atop a vehicle and shines his light high to draw everyone to himself. Leo stands atop a car to draw every single person's attention to himself. He boldly taunts the angry crowd, ensuring all the thugs lock onto him. For a brief moment, the entire underground garage falls dead silent in total shock. Enraged by his disrespect, the furious mob violently surges forward to crush him. Leo instantly turns around and sprints across the cars to lead them away. He moves toward the heavy shutter door, executing his hidden tactical plan. Suddenly, a quick attacker lunges from the side and strikes Leo forcefully.
The heavy blow sends Leo crashing directly back against the metal shutter door. The aggressive mob closes in, believing they have finally trapped him completely. Holding his injury, Leo places his hand firmly on the metal garage shutter. He struggles to stay standing while keeping the entire crowd focused on him. Leo then secretly activates his glowing spatial ability directly against the metal door. The mob stares in confusion as a bright purple light begins glowing behind Leo. The crowd freezes in complete shock when the heavy metal gate suddenly vanishes into thin air. Leo shouts furiously at the attackers, using his power to unleash a massive trap. The giant wall hums and shakes as spatial energy crackles across the open space. A colossal wave of snow explodes out from the opening with immense, violent force. The massive avalanche crashes straight down into the garage toward the helpless crowd. The terrified attackers scramble frantically in every direction to flee from the freezing storm. Snow rushes through the parking level, sweeping away vehicles and burying everyone in its path. One screaming thug gets violently swept away and submerged in the ice and snow. A few desperate survivors dive inside a nearby doorway to escape the crushing wave. Silence returns as tons of snow completely fill the space and seal off the entrance. Suddenly, a lone hand punches through the deep frozen snow to reach the surface. A young survivor crawls out of the deep snow, gasping and coughing heavily for air. He looks at his hands in surprise, amazed that using his power did not drain his energy. Looking up, he notices a white-haired veteran crouching nearby, silently staring right at him. Sweat drips down his face as he realizes the mysterious stranger has been watching him all along. As shouts echo nearby about the avalanche stopping, they quietly slip away into the dark building. They head deep into a ruined basement corridor to talk in total privacy.
The young man backs away cautiously, asking the older stranger why he followed him inside. The veteran stands tall and introduces himself as Lee, causing the young man to retreat nervously. Lee smirks and holds out his bandaged hand, offering a sudden truce between them. Shocked by the gesture, the young man asks Lee what he is trying to do. Lee keeps his hand stretched out, waiting for him to accept the proposed agreement. When reminded of his past rejection, Lee casually replies that he changed his mind and wants to cooperate. Hank asks Lee suspiciously if he is suddenly trying to scam him by changing his mind. Lee demands a quick answer, pressuring Hank to decide right away whether to join forces. Hank calculates that teaming up with Lee will raise their chances of defeating Nora. Hank agrees to the deal, admitting he does not trust Lee but shares the same target. Hank extends his hand toward Lee to seal their temporary agreement with a handshake. Lee firmly grips Hank's hand, officially forming a partnership to hunt down their enemy.
If you want part 2 of this video, drop a comment, and at 1,000 likes, I'll release part 2. Tell us in the comments how much you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe for part 2.